Live from Leadfeather Studios, it's the most controversial film podcast on the air. I don't give a flick.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
Buckle up, Buttercup. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Buckle Up, Buttercup. Just kidding. That is...
Why do you buckle up, Buttercup, baby, just to let me down.
Let me down.
And mash me around Waterloo. No.
I was going to say, worst of all,
no.
it's worse. And worst of all, never say... Damn it, Carrie. You ruin every song. This is just like last week's...
God.
This is just like last week's episode with fucking Blair Witch Project. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of I Don't Give a Flick. I am one of your hosts, Jonny Blackburn, and alongside me this week, as they are every week, because I can't seem to get rid of them, we've got...
Gary Elmore.
And Neil Riley.
And we're coming to you live from Leadfeather Studios in beautiful Austin, Texas. That is actually not a complete lie like the other times we've done introductions like that, because we do have a few of us at Leadfeather's headquarters based in Austin. So not a complete lie. So I don't feel as bad as I normally do for saying stuff like that. Anyways, this week we are we're welcoming back to the show a lot of former guests. We've got a big panel tonight because we have heard your pleas, we've heard your cries, asking us to get back to the franchise episodes. We had a lot of success with our Star Wars and Star Trek episodes, and you guys want it? You got it. We are covering the Matrix franchise tonight in anticipation for the 4th installment of the series coming out here at the end of the year. Welcoming back to the show, we have got a frequent contributor, Mr. Ian Webb, from the upcoming new podcast. Ian, I'm going to mess it up if I try to say the title, so I'll let you introduce it. Go ahead.
At last. That is Cult and Trash Horror Movie Grind.
That's right. That's right. I keep thinking of your old one, The Movie's So Bad They're Good Midnight Cult Classics in Camp, and it took me a while to get that one.
Totally different. It'd be a totally different thing.
Oh, a little. I've been on a couple episodes. It's a little different than the other one.
Yeah. There's talks, nothing official, but talks of yet another podcast in the future.
Yes, I know you guys. You're currently just kind of giving our listeners, for those of them that haven't heard the last couple episodes with you on, you're currently joining a group on YouTube that is coming out with, it's basically nothing but horror podcasts, right?
Yeah, that's true. So that YouTube channel is called Infamous Horror. It might even be out by the time this episode comes out. I don't know yet. It's out of my control. But it's called Infamous Horror, and it has a bunch of different shows. One of which is my show, which is called Trash Horror Movie Grind, which is pretty much making fun of bad horror movies, but also nerding out about the cult classics. But it's all in the horror genre.
Absolutely, man. And I've just been absolutely super excited to join you guys for the last couple episodes. Even the surrealist films, which are not my favorite, we still have a really good time, a lot of great discussions. So thanks for coming back, man. I'm excited to get you on this one. Also coming up, actually, it was this guy's request originally that got us going here on the franchise, kind of the talks originally. Lucas Herr is back with us again. Luke, welcome back to the show.
Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for having me back again. I think this is number 4, something like that.
4? You came for Star Wars, Star Trek, the rating system.
Christmas.
Okay, so 5th.
I've definitely done at least 3 with you before.
Yeah. I feel like you've probably done 50% of everyone that we've ever come out with. Maybe a little less. But yeah.
Yeah. It's a good number.
Yeah, it is. It's a solid number, and I think Neil and Gary, I think you guys have been on with us for like 50 something episodes at this point, 40 something.
I believe this is actually going to be our 50th episode.
Noise.
Is this actually our 50th episode tonight?
I believe it is.
Really? Okay. Well, right on, baby. Right on. Okay. Number 50 coming at you live. The first caller to call in gets a grand prize of something we're not going to divulge to you quite yet.
Jonny,
Yep.
go ahead and pick up your cell phone. I'm calling you.
Okay, great, perfect. Hello.
First one in.
First one in. First one to speak to me in a while.
You want a lead feather koozie?
You want a lead feather headband? Come on.
If you
koozie,
actually
that's
go to our
so
Patreon
1980s.
account, you can sign up and get free merchandise for the top tier.
Oh,
That is right. That is right. And we actually just launched that a couple weeks ago, right? Or about a month ago or so.
Correct.
At this point. And also welcoming back to the podcast. It's been a while, but Michael, the guy who brings the Payne every week, not just because his last name is Payne, but Michael, welcome back, sir.
thank you. This will be my 7th podcast appearance, and rest assured, I've become exceedingly efficient at it.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Not to step on anyone's toes for like being on for 5 podcasts, but he's been on for 7. So
Oh,
I don't recall how many exactly you've been on, so I can't dispute that, but it sounds about right. I'd say that's okay.
close
So
enough to
tonight,
call it
guys.
accurate.
Exactly. So tonight we are going to jump into the Matrix franchise. We know that you guys have been asking about it. We've had a lot of requests for the James Bond, Indiana Jones franchises as well. We will get to those among others moving forward. But tonight we're going to jump onto the Matrix because, as I said earlier, in anticipation of the film coming up here at the end of the year. So let's jump right into it. The Matrix series created by the Wachowskis, excuse me, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, really just completely took the world, not just American cinema, but the world cinema by storm. It really, I can't ever say it brought action sci-fi movies to the forefront, but it kind of made them badass again. And we'll totally get into that in depth here tonight and have some pretty excellent debates planned out here for you. So let's jump in. I wanted to hear everyone's kind of first memories of the series. I think we're all around the same age here, so I think we were all in middle school and high school when we saw the first couple. So let's start out, Luke. Since this was your original idea when you brought it up to me a couple months ago, I want you to start out. What were your first memories of the series? How old were you when you first saw it? What were your first impressions?
So first one came out in '99, I believe, and so I would have been about 11 years old.
Right.
And I remember, I mean, it was when it came out, it was already big. Like you'd see the commercials all over. People were talking about it, but I was obviously 11, and so my mom wasn't going to take me to see it. But I remember a friend of mine from school who was a huge Star Wars fan. We used to nerd out on like Star Wars and Pokemon together. He saw it with his dad, and he came back one weekend. He was telling me about it. He was like, "Oh, it's the coolest thing." It's like, we going through the story of he basically broke down the whole story for me before I even saw it when I was like 11. It was like, okay, that sounds kind of cool, but I don't know. It's not Star Wars, so whatever. And then I was at my friend Billy's house. You remember Billy, Johnny, my friend from I was at his house that summer, and his mom rented it, and we weren't allowed to watch it. So we were playing N64. We were playing Super Mario in the living room, and his mom was watching The Matrix in her bedroom, and she had the door shut because I think it was rated R. And so we were not, it was no go. And I remember we went in there at one point throughout the night to get money for pizza because Billy and I were going to order pizza. And we walked in on the scene where Morpheus and Neo are fighting in the Kung Fu dojo. And I was watching it and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I asked her, I was like, Karen, so what do you think of this movie? And she goes, well, it's just weird so far. I don't really understand what's going on. I had the same thing. I was like, okay, I guess this movie's just weird, whatever. But then I was staying with my dad, my brother, my dad, and I watched it for the first time. And it was sort of like watching Star Wars for the first time. And I'm going to contend that I think The Matrix was kind of the Star Wars of its time. And it kind of went the bad way, the way that Star Wars could have gone, and ended up kind of going with the prequel trilogy. But it was just completely blown away from the opening scene to where you establish, okay, Trinity is kind of a superhero. There's this woman, she's got this magical power basically, but then there's these other agents who also have this magical power. And then you get into Neo, and then you have, essentially the perfect hero's journey and all that stuff. But I'll save that for later. But I'm just being a kid, it was basically the same feeling I had when I saw Star Wars, which just completely blew my mind. And I just I didn't know movies could do that.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, I actually was a lot later to the game when I had jumped in, because as at least most of you know, when I was growing up, my parents were very, very, my mom at least, dad didn't give a shit. They were super strict on what I could watch. And another reason like why we did, why I felt so strong about doing the rating system film is because, they talk about those PG-13 ratings or those R ratings, and really for the most part, even especially in The Matrix, I don't really think the movie should have been rated R. I mean, it's not even really gratuitous violence. Like it's kung fu. There's not people getting shot. There's really
a ton of people
blood.
getting shot.
Yeah, no. I'm saying
though.
it's not blood though. That's what I'm saying. Is there's really it's not.
Yeah, when
grotesque or
Morpheus,
anything.
when Morpheus gets shot in the ankle, like you see blood.
Spoiler alert.
Oh,
Oh
God.
man, yeah, that should have given it. That should have gotten it a rated R viewing for sure. Absolutely, and they don't even curse that much. And I don't know. I felt that, anyways. Just as a kid, it's me still being pissed off for my parents not letting me watch it for all those years. But I was like 16 when I first saw it. It came on TBS. And so I actually saw the edited for TV version, but it was still really badass. It was still really dope. I've talked about in other podcasts, I was really big into like the kung fu movies of the 70s, 80s, 90s back when I was younger, because my parents just didn't give a crap. They were like, oh, the audio is really sketchy and it's funny. And I guess the action wasn't super realistic to them. I have no idea why, but they let me watch as much kung fu as I wanted to. But same thing, like with you, what you said, Luke, when they're in the dojo between Morpheus and Neo, like that one scene by itself, I was hooked instantly. I mean, the story could have been shit, but the action and the graphics would have just completely pulled me in, and I was hooked from the get go on it. But yeah, I was definitely behind the curve. And actually, Gary, I think you or Matt Peroni, I can't remember, back in high school, one of you guys had the trilogy on a DVD set. Maybe it might have been Matt. But I ended up seeing Reloaded and Revolutions because of you guys. When we would have our lunch period, we would go into the theater, and typically there were no teachers around. And so we would just stick one of the DVDs into the TV there that was in the theater room, and we would just watch whatever we wanted to.
Johnny, we were such bad kids back in the day. Damn.
I know.
Yeah, I was like, you're admitting to seeing a
Matrix.
rated R film before age?
Wee wee.
Your public school system's hard at work.
Yes.
That's right. So that was my intro to it. Gary, how about you? What was your first memory of seeing this series take off?
Yeah, I mean, I did not see it in theaters. I saw it when I was older as well. I think the first time I saw it, I may have rented it from Blockbuster, which for you kids was a store.
Really
You actually
gave
had to
you
get off your
pleasure.
ass and like go pick up a movie.
Hey, that place was where to be Friday night.
Yeah,
Hey,
it was.
that's right, baby.
Yeah, I
You talk
love.
bad about Blockbuster.
Yeah, I love Blockbuster. I had the gold card pass, so I got to rent whatever I wanted.
Such a big deal.
Yeah,
Such a big
somebody's-
deal going in there.
Somebody's fancy.
yeah.
I mean, you plan your whole weekend out in an hour of standing around. Like
My
you
whole
decide
life,
what
really.
games you want to rent. And yeah, really. You just the next 48 hours is decided by that 1 hour that you're in there on Friday night.
Yeah, and it was just it was such a different movie for its time because it had a lot of action, a lot of movement, which other movies had, but like this was like really like looked really, really good. Like if you think about like Commando or something, that's a movie that's got a lot of action, but like it's not like a lot of interesting fisticuffs. And then you have like, as you were saying, like the old kung fu movies that
Right.
may have had better kung fu, but like they didn't have all the big budget for the CGI. This kind of put all those together, and then you had racing, and then you had like gunplay, and you had helicopters, and like this crazy ass story. And it was just it was an experience. And then like you had to figure out like what the Matrix was, and getting red pilled. And it's
The
just
themes, the themes were not, there were some pretty deep, philosophical themes to the movie. It wasn't just, action sequences. There was some thoughtfulness behind the philosophy of the universe and of the characters and stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, more than even like the innovations that they had for the filming, you could talk about the tone and the themes and the underlying messages of the Matrix movies. You could probably do a whole dissertation on that in school, and I am sure that there are quite a few PhD students who have done that.
Somebody should do a podcast about that.
They should.
Well,
Yeah,
we're
I
here
don't
to
know.
answer your prayers.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Michael, what about you? What first memories of seeing the series?
So I think I might be maybe a year or two older than the rest of y'all. Not by much, but just a year or two. So when The Matrix, the first one had come out, it was 99, and I believe it was March of that year. So I was ending 8th grade, about to start 9th grade. And I was turning 13 that year. So it was right at the cusp of starting to enter those angsty teenage years. And so going to a movie that had, and seeing this movie, I want to say my dad is actually the one that took my brother and me to go see it over that. It must have been in April time. So it was just before school was out. Went to go see the movie and was just absolutely enthralled with it. I mean, everything about it, the dark elements, the at least the feeling, like the philosophy, the depth of it, the tone, everything just kind of fed into, yep, I'm a teenager now and I'm going to be angsty as shit. And like every kid I knew after that movie came out wanted a pair of those sunglasses that Morpheus had that didn't have the earpieces on them, that just clipped on the bridge of your nose. Everybody wanted a pair of those sunglasses. Everybody wanted like a long dark trench coat. Everybody wanted.
I was gonna say the Matrix revived dusters
The dusters, baby. Oh man,
Yep.
Yeah. At least for Mac and Company, that's true.
Like it was such a. It was such an influential movie on at least our generation, and moving into those early high school years, late middle school, early high school, and just feeding into that angst. It was wonderful. I'd give anything to go back and experience that again.
It's nice to see that The Matrix had a multi-generational effect then, for when you were a kid and then when we were kids.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember when Nixon was in office. So.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Good
Back when I
times.
sat next to Jesus in the 3rd grade. Absolutely. Ian, what about you? First memories of the Matrix series?
Well, I remember the soundtrack was done by everybody's favorite director, Rob Zombie.
Oh, Ian, let's get off the Rob Zombie train before that
Was a good
train is
soundtrack.
derailed.
It was a really good soundtrack. So yeah, pretty much same as everybody. Basically you all nailed it. It took me a little while to see. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it when it came out on video, and
Dio? What is that?
It killed
What's
the
a
radio
video?
star, didn't it?
Womp womp.
Dio. This is not a digital download. This is something different from
Yeah,
yesteryear.
back in the day, yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember people who did see it, they were talking about it, and I had no idea what the fuck they were talking about. Like,
Yeah.
what is the Matrix? Like, I remember people talking about like why do you need payphones to leave the Matrix? And I was trying to understand what this movie was before I saw it. I was thinking like it was a physical place that people would like come and go out of.
Yeah.
And then I pretty much like had that idea when I did first see it when I was 12, and I was so confused. But then,
Well, remember, nobody can be told what the Matrix is.
True.
yeah,
So what are we even doing here?
Exactly.
Exactly. We shouldn't even bother discussing this. Let's just do a fucking 2-hour episode on popular theme songs from 80 sitcoms, just like we discussed. Neil, how about you? What were your first memories of the Matrix?
So I would have been 13 when The Matrix came out, and I remember seeing it in theaters with my mother actually, and it was very interesting
Of course.
because I heard about this movie and how interesting and new and crazy it was, and I was like, "There's no way my mom would be interested in going." But she came to me one day and she's like, "Hey, I want to go see this movie called The Matrix," and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, let's do it." And she goes, "Because I love my cousin Vinny, and I heard Joe Pesci is in it," and I'm like, "Well, that's interesting." It wasn't until about halfway through the movie she meant Joe Patliano was in it.
Joey Pants.
So she left that movie very upset and like, what the hell did I just watch?
Oh no.
Oh my god, that's fucking classic. Oh,
So
yeah.
that was my experience with The Matrix.
that's probably the best one. I love it. I'm glad that and I don't know how many of us actually went back and rewatched any of it today, but even when we've seen it over the years, because it's been over 20 years since the first one came out, it still provides that strong sense of nostalgia for us, which I know that we all know and love. But yeah, I mean, it started trends. It goes back to Michael what you were talking about with the sunglasses that Morpheus wore. Those same sunglasses, which are essentially almost, they're pretty similar to those clip-on sunglasses we make fun of our parents and grandparents for wearing when they clip them onto their glasses, and then Lawrence Fishburne wears them in this badass film, and everybody wants them. We had even to this day, there's still memes and stuff talking about, are we really in the Matrix or are we really in reality? Like, and who knows? For all we know, we very well could be. So I think we kind of already went over why the Matrix series became so popular, and it kind of also feeds into our next set, anyways. We talked about the kung fu. We talked about the revolutionary graphics that they used back in the day with the slowing down of the very iconic shot of when the agent fires that bullet at Neo and he basically bends backwards all the way onto his heels, basically, and almost touches the ground. And you see the ripples of the bullet follow behind the bullet going over his head. I mean, that's just, I can't really think of a more iconic scene than that one. People. Which one?
The Trinity, when she jumps up and does the kick.
That's right.
Yeah,
goes backwards out the window. That's a big one.
That was also were like the two most spoofed scenes.
The Trinity kick was also interesting because that's the first time you kind of see, like, wait a minute, because that's very, very early on in the movie. You're like, what's happening in this movie? And so kind of sets you up really nicely.
Yep.
It does. It really does. I mean, how many of us tried to do that Neo dodge at some point when we were in high school, like with our friends?
It didn't work out.
That's why I can no longer walk.
Yeah,
just fucked your ankles up so
still
bad.
Got knee problems.
God, weird.
Yeah, that bullet like hit me straight in the chest. It did not.
Yeah, I would not have been able to dodge that. There's no way in hell. But yeah, I mean, it certainly popularized that type of sci-fi action film, and we'll certainly get into the movies that were kind of copycats of that. But I did want to jump into kind of the theories behind the movie and the philosophies that the Wachowskis wrote the script based off of, the stories that they wrote the script based off of. Kind of going ahead and hinting at what Luke was talking about a little bit earlier. So let's get into that. First question that we had on this was, did the Wachowskis steal too much material from great storytellers, such as Lewis Carroll there for the Adventures of Alice in Wonderland, or Plato, or there were a bunch of other stories that we've heard about from critics and just people over the years where they're saying the Wachowskis either took inspiration from this or they basically just plagiarized it and copied it off as their own. Thoughts on that? Ian, I'm gonna let you go first because you and I were kind of talking about this morning briefly.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it's definitely not plagiarized by any means. It's more of like borrowed ideas, because I mean, they took a bunch of things from many different things and it just expanded upon it. So like that was a Wonderland thing. They're definitely not plagiarized. It's just like a little like nod to it. But I'm glad you brought up Plato. Yeah, Plato's cave, which is definitely the big one. Which for those who don't know, that's the idea that Plato had, where you take an idea of people who were born in a cave and they're unable to move or anything, and they live their whole lives in this cave, looking at the wall in front of them, and as far as they know, that's all of what all of the world is, and they just see shadows and they think that's real until eventually one of them leaves the cave, discovers discovers the actual real world, and then can't handle it, and they want to go back to the cave because that's like all they know. That's basically kind of the idea of the Matrix. Like with Cypher, he wants to go back to the Matrix because
When
he does.
Right, when he strikes the deal with Agent Smith, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He wants to go back because, it's like too much for him, and it's hard for Neo to, when he finds out about what the real world is. It's he has a hard time grasping that, and he rejects it, and that's basically the idea of Plato's cave. But other than that, yeah, there's a bunch of other like movies and stuff that they borrowed. Uh, the
I mean,
actually,
I think
go ahead.
well, the thing with the cave was it's not that the person who leaves the cave doesn't want to go. It's the person who leaves the cave then comes back and tries to communicate that the people are chained and it's shadows, and the people who are chained refuse to believe them because it's about people's unwillingness to confront the true nature, and they prefer to be comfortable rather than truthful.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you got it. Um, yeah. So there is a book that came out, I think, in the '60s by famous sci-fi author Philip K. Dick, and he did the book that Blade Runner was based off of, Total
Andrew
Recall.
and Street.
Yeah, phenomenal sci-fi writer. He did a book called Ubik, which is not very popular, but this is a story where there is, and keep in mind, this was written in the '60s, where people who die, their consciousness is uploaded into a computer program, where they get to live at, in this like other reality where like laws of physics don't really apply the same way. And I mean, for the '60s, that's incredible. And Philip K. Dick was definitely a big on the idea of simulation theory. So I would say that the Matrix probably took some ideas from that. I mean, it's not a very well known book, but when I read it, it had strong Matrix vibes.
So from everything that you're talking about, it sounds like the Wachowskis went ahead and took a lot of material from a lot of different people, or maybe a small amount from a lot of different people, and then made their own script. So that goes to the question: was this genius writing, and were they trailblazing, or were they just riding off the coattails of people that had come before them that had already come up with these ideas?
Well, I believe it was the writer T.S. Eliot that once said that good writers borrow, great writers steal outright
Okay.
for ideas. And I mean, I think that there's only so many different kinds of ideas that we humans have. I mean, it was once said there's only 4 stories that are just told again and again.
That's right.
4 stories and 7 songs.
Thank you. 4 stories and 7 songs, our forefathers. No, that's not right.
Wrong address.
Oh God. So I mean,
That's true. It's true.
yeah, like so. I mean, like, how do you take these few different storylines and kind of tell them in a new and interesting way? And I think the Wachowskis, they did a really good job of grabbing a lot of these really deep and fundamental questions that people have, like, are we in a real world? Are we living a fantasy life, or is this reality? Because I mean, even today, people still harken back to that idea, like Elon Musk was talking about. I think it's more likely we're living in a simulation than the real world. And he's a fairly astute guy, so he might be right. But it's like these basic concepts, and then they mix it with, of course, a story of love and of hope. I mean, Neo being the one is a little bit like sort of the messianic figure, or the Jesus figure of the story.
That's every religion across the history of time is yeah. I mean, you're right. That's one that's universal. Like, it seems like every civilization across our time on Earth has had that type of story integrated in their society at its core, for sure.
Right, yeah. And so like they took all these and they kind of just put them together in their own unique way. It's like for music, there's only 8 notes in an octave, and so what do you do with those? But you have music that runs the gamut from like Ella Fitzgerald in the '40s to wet ass pussy today. It's just beautiful.
Classic. Well, it's just like, it's the same. I think it's a lot of the great stuff. It's like, again, I hate to be kind of beating a dead horse, but it's a lot like Star Wars, where George Lucas took elements of things that he really, really liked, and he kind of fused them together into his own little thing. And I think that's kind of where you get that drive for the creativity, is that the creator has so much love for all these different things, and it's just their passion for them and trying to put them together and do it in their own way that that sparks and drives that creativity that produces that kind of work.
For sure. So, Luke, question to you then, provided that just due to what the Wachowskis came up with over the last few years, I mean, collectively, those three movies collected about over $3 billion worldwide over the last 20 years or so, over the last 2 decades or so. So was the idea of collecting all these stories, putting them together and creating something quote unquote new, was it genius, or was it just they were kind of hitting it at the right time?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I think you have to be. I mean, none of us did what they did, and nobody had done it before them, and nobody's really done it since then. So I think there has to be an element of creative genius in order to strike a chord like that. Whether you could, I don't know if you could do it again. I mean, I kind of think The Matrix it's one of those lightning in a bottle movies, sort of like Willy Wonka, where it's like it wasn't just the Wachowski brothers, it was the time, it was the special effects, you know what I mean? That was part of it, was so revolutionary there, and it kind of brought in this whole new era of CG special effects and all that. So I think it's a little bit of both, but I don't think you can deny that there's a creative genius there, but you also can't deny that, like any good creator, they're taking elements of what has worked previously and trying to build on them.
Yeah, and like they were really influential. I mean, because Michael, what was the movie you were telling me about where like it kind of copied because in the Matrix movie, there's the camera and it pans through the TV screen into the interview room, and was it Kate Beckinsale, Werewolves and Vampires.
Underworld.
Was it Underworld?
I think it was Underworld. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they do that same kind of shot with like the clock on the wall or something.
Right.
And like how many times has that shot been mimicked? I mean, like it culturally impacted the way movies were done. And, I think that was really a cool thing to kind of see.
Right. And I think I'd have to agree with everything said. I also think the timing of the movie was extraordinarily important for its success, because this was still the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s. It was a new millennium. The internet was still something that, I mean, people were using AOL to get online. People were using like Netscape Navigator, things of that nature. Like the internet was still mysterious in a lot of ways, and a lot of people weren't necessarily online like they are today. I mean, you look at today and how many times are we connected to the internet? For most people, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they carry their cell phone around with them. Back in the late 90s, that wasn't the case.
So we're basically hooked up to the Matrix now.
Yes. I mean, that's a philosophical way of saying it, but back then we weren't always connected like we are now. So there was still that mystery of what is the internet? What is the possibilities of these connections, and what are we looking at in the future as we move into the new millennium? And I think that was just great timing for that movie to come out, because I think that played a lot into it. And then it was 99 when you had the Y2K scare was really starting to kick up, and I think the Matrix started to feed into that fear and that paranoia that people had of, oh God, the computers are all going to turn off, but what if they actually turn against us? Like, I mean, I don't think if that movie had come out in 98 or 97, while I still think it would have been successful, I don't know if it would have been as impactful culturally as it was even in 99, just 1 year later.
Do you remember?
How about that?
Yeah. Do you remember at the turn of the millennium when everybody was so full of hope for what this century was going to bring? And then we've had the last 21 years.
Oh, we've made plenty of strides. But Michael, so question based off that, if it came out now, if the first Matrix came out this year, how do you think it would do? I
think it would do well. I don't think it would have as strong a cultural impact is what I'm getting at. Like, I think it would still be financially successful, COVID. I think it would still be financially successful. I don't think it would be as culturally impactful as it was then.
I mean, that's hard to say though, because I mean, like, how many movies have been impacted by that, and like what kind of shots and things wouldn't have even been, thought of without, like, it's hard. It's, you can never get an answer to this, but like, it's an interesting thought experiment by, taking that out, because how many video games and movies and storylines were created by that? So it's hard to untangle that.
True. I do agree. There were so many things that were impacted by that, and so many things over the past 20 years that have had a touch of it or have had an element in there. I don't know. That's an interesting point to bring up. I mean, yes, I think it would be culturally impactful. I'm still stuck on that idea of the turn of the millennium and the turn of the century, and how the world was changing and Yep, the world is changing.
Well, and to that end, I want to point out where I think you're right on that is one of the things to think about is, I mean, obviously this whole idea of the machines rising up had kind of been done in Terminator and had been done in science fiction previously. Right. But the interesting point about the 2000s is you're starting to get home computers, you're starting to get mass network connections to where you can download things online. AOL is coming out. So it's an interesting time because although the internet is in its infancy, it's very clear at that point where this is going. It's slower and it's not as efficient, but you can see, okay, if we can get download speeds up, if we can get processing speeds up, you could kind of see at that point in society, we're like, okay, in 10 or 15 years, the whole world is going to be connected. Like at that time, it was starting to be clear just how powerful the internet really was, and a way that it wasn't clear in 1994, 1995. But I mean, I think if you think about it, YouTube came out 5 years later, in 2005 or 6 years later, and that kind of changed everything. You know what I mean? Because now any kind of media was available online. So I think the point about the timing is true, because not only was technology in a different place, but we were starting to recognize, oh wow, this is kind of the potential of where this technology thing can go. We're genuinely on the precipice of having the whole world connected.
Yeah, and I think this is movies like this. We're talking about these types of franchises, and if we'll go back to our former episodes at the beginning of season 2 when we talked about Star Trek and Star Wars. The reason these movies are so culturally impactful is exactly what you guys are talking about right now. Is exactly turn of the century or some gigantic cultural shift that's happened, and then a movie that was made kind of based around that, or had that in the back of the writers' minds when they were creating the series or the world that it was built in. It's certainly, and it's never given that credit. I don't really ever feel that the Matrix series is really talked about among the biggest franchises in the history of cinema, where it talks about how much of a trailblazer it was and how much of a cultural impact it had and how it spoke to a lot of societal issues in so many different ways, and not even just societal, religiously too. It's just crazy to think about. To go off that too, Ian, I know you had talked about earlier, there were a couple movies that you had come up that inspired the Matrix and then also were inspired themselves by the Matrix. What were some of those? I was just curious.
Ones that were inspired by the Matrix. Well,
Yeah.
there's one that actually just came out this year. It's called Bliss. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
It was kind of just straight to streaming. But actually, it has Owen Wilson and Selma Hayek in it, and it's basically, I mean, it's definitely like in the very poor man's Matrix. But it's basically Owen Wilson finds out that he's living in a simulation, and him and Selma Hayek, they're the only real people. And this isn't even a spoiler. This is like the first scene of the movie.
Yeah.
They are just living the only people in the simulation, and they can they learn how to control things like telekinesis kind of stuff, and they get to leave the Matrix or the simulation by doing crystal meth and living under a bridge. Is great.
Okay.
That's one. There's one that actually came out. Oh well, this actually doesn't quite answer your question. There's one that came out the same year as Matrix in 1999, by David Cronenberg, a movie called Existence, which is amazing. It's basically kind of the same thing. It's there's this new virtual reality game that you plug into, and then you're suddenly in another world, just like the Matrix. And it came out the same year. It's really cool. But the big one is Westworld, the TV series Westworld.
Oh sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge one too. I didn't think about that.
I love Westworld. I think it's hands down the best series, or it's definitely up there. It's one of the best
Yeah, and it's surprising how many there actually are. I just, out of all the stuff I was thinking about myself and just researching, there were Inception, there were bits and pieces of Watchmen. It's just Oblivion, V for Vendetta, even, they, not that they were completely identical to the Matrix, but yeah, they both took bits and pieces of it and then kind of tried to make their own mainstream through that. Yeah,
The
it's
Westworld really like did a great job of like recreating it, like taking the same theme and ideas, but like turning it into something completely new, which also comes from an old movie in the 70s. I mean, it's basically Jurassic Park meets Terminator meets The Matrix.
yeah.
It's funny you should say that because Michael Crichton was the writer and director of Westworld.
Yeah, I know.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
So
you
really
saying
quick,
Michael Crichton wrote and directed Westworld and Jurassic Park, so he copied and pasted his own story again?
He sure did. God
Oh my
damn.
goodness.
And Timeline and Prey and Congo and my God, he's
Chromosome
It's almost like
46.
you're saying there's a set
Good.
number of
Good.
stories, and they just put different faces on them.
yeah.
So can you guys think of any, I know this wasn't in our itinerary for the evening, but can any of you guys think just off the top of your heads really quick, a movie that might have inspired, because it sounds like the Wachowskis, they took a lot of bits and pieces from a lot of different movies, and I'm going to take Terminator off the board because Luke already mentioned that, and that's a really good one. So I'll give you guys a quick second. The one that always popped into my head was obviously Blade Runner. I just always kind of thought that they had a lot of similarities to each other. I personally, entertainment wise, I always thought The Matrix was a better movie, but Blade Runner is going to always be a classic. Gary, what about you? What kind of pops into your head? What do you think? The Wachowskis were kind of sitting there one day and they're like, okay, we need to come up with a story and we need this idea and let's go watch something for inspiration. Boom. What do you think? What do you think came to their mind?
I mean, like, if I had to narrow it down to one movie, I mean, like Alice in Wonderland, of course, is an obvious inspiration for that. Because it's got some of the same themes of not knowing you're asleep. So.
Yeah, and basically dreaming up the entire storyline, essentially, and that in itself is it's got to just be difficult to do from a writer's standpoint. Neil, what about you? What kind of pops into your head?
To me, it would be anybody here familiar with Ghost in the Shell?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
to me, that's definitely something that influenced it. Them trying to prevent crimes that are going to happen in the future.
Luke, how about you?
I mean, stuff. I don't know if they were taken directly off of this, but certainly Brazil and Metropolis, stuff like that. You can kind of see those themes of AI, and you can see of technocratic overlords and stuff like that, and this sort of dystopian reality. But I've never seen them state directly that they were influenced by those works. But I definitely see that.
And for all we know, some of the ones that we've read about and heard about could have also, those movies could have been influenced by some of the other movies that we're thinking of too. We have no way of knowing, Michael, how about you? What pops into your head?
Back in the late 80s, I think this was before Ghost in the Shell, possibly before Ghost in the Shell. There was an animated film from Japan called Akira. It was about a nuclear bomb that got dropped in Tokyo, and 30 or so years later, there was this guy who was having to save either his brother or his friend, one of the two.
His friend.
It was friend from like a government facility where it was like they were doing ESP experiments on him, and it turns out the guy he saves also ended up developing what could be considered like supernatural powers similar to what Neo had, that he was able to discover that he was able to use within the Matrix itself. I think Akira probably had a lot of influence on it.
It's certainly a disgusting film.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
Okay. I don't think I've seen that one. I'll go to check it out at some point. Ian, how about you?
You know what? Actually, I bet you didn't see this coming, but Dune.
Okay.
Not a movie, but I mean, at the time, I mean, there was the old Dune, but
you're referring to the book series, the novel. Sure.
Yeah. So the idea is that if you read or watch Dune, you'll realize that there's no computers at all, no robots, no any of that. And the reason why is because 10,000 years before the story takes place, there is a robot uprising. So it's basically like Terminator, but I'm basically, since you took that off the shelf, I'm taking the same thing but saying Dune. There's pretty much a robot uprising, and that actually influenced Terminator and The Matrix and all the other robots are bad movies. So yeah, that's a big one. And we were kind of talking about it a little bit before we started recording. There's a movie called Dark City that came out 1 year before The Matrix, 1998, which takes very similar themes.
Same studio to Fox Sydney.
Yeah, actually, exact same set design. It's like that spiral staircase with the black and white tiles and everything in The Matrix, where Neo gets his deja vu. That exact set is in Dark City, so that's interesting. But yeah, that's a big one. But yeah, that's what I got.
Huh. I'm honestly, I'm flabbergasted that you didn't say 2001: A Space Odyssey. I really thought that was going to be your pick. I went, okay, all right. I mean, I get it. You've been on the Dune train for a while, so I appreciate that.
I mean, I wasn't really thinking about that. I mean, yeah, there's the robot is bad deal.
Sure. So we could talk all day about the theories and the inspirations behind it, but we want to have a little room for those of us that for those of our listeners that either are not familiar with this series or they want to go ahead and get that nostalgia factor again by reliving the glory days and hearing the short synopses that we have prepared for each film. So Luke, I want to let you take the first movie away, since like I had said, this was your idea and this was kind of your baby originally. Just kind of giving us a brief rundown of the film, and then, just your own, just to be your own critique, but just out of the cinematic checklist, what you really loved about it and what you disliked and what you thought they did well or maybe could have done better, anything like that, and then we'll all jump in when you're finished. But yeah, give us a short rundown of the first Matrix.
Okay, so the first Matrix is what I think to be probably the closest thing there can be to the perfect movie. I think the
Damn.
writing is very well done. I don't think there's any inch of screen time that's really wasted. The characters are developed well enough. The action sequences are good without being indulgent. You've got cinematic checklist. You've got a great opening scene that not only kind of blows you away, but establishes the world really well. You've got a very tightly crafted hero's journey. I mean, you can literally read down the list of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and just saying the names of the hero's journey: call to adventure, refusal, mentor, helper, like immediately at what point in the movie that is, because it's so tightly crafted. And so basic synopsis is Neo Thomas A. Anderson is a hacker, and he's been searching for, he's a hacker online. He's guilty of pretty much every computer crime we have a law for. And he gets contacted on his computer by another anonymous hacker. And he basically, through a series of events, he meets an individual that he's been looking for a long time, whose name is Morpheus, who, interestingly enough, is the Greek god of dreams and sleep, which kind of lays out where this character is going. And Morpheus basically tells him, there's a truth to be told to you. If you follow us and if you come with us, we'll reveal the truth to you. And then this is where we get the famous, getting red pilled, the phrase getting red pilled, and the red pill and the blue pill. And he presents Neo with a choice, which is something that recurs particularly in the second and third movies, this idea of choice and how much of things are determinism versus how many of things are free will. He says, if you take the red pill, you'll see the truth. If you take the blue pill, you'll go back to sleep. And then throughout the rest of the movie, you have this kind of awakening where Neo realizes that the world that he's been living in, the world that we see, is essentially a control system, a fake control system that's used to keep people, to turn people into human resources and keep them as essentially biofuel for the machines. And the whole world is essentially a control system that's designed to just turn them into a resource. And Neo's now been told that he and his friends are going to be the ones that are going to be able to save humanity from this horrible fate that they've set for themselves. And then as we go through the movie, again, you have essentially the basic hero's journey where Neo starts to doubt himself. He doesn't know if he is the one. He has his low point. He has his atonement. He has his road back. He has his resurrection. He, again, like I said, that basically perfectly hits every single beat of the hero's journey without being overindulgent or wasting any screen time. And the special effects are great. The character development, writing is great. It's hard to say something about the Matrix that hasn't already been said a million times.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, a nice rundown. You did it in under 2 minutes. I'm quite surprised. Love it. So you had said that this is the near perfect movie for you, and you and I have talked about this on multiple occasions over the years. This is not the first time I'm hearing you talk about this or say these things. So if I was to walk up to you, or just a stranger walked up to you and said, "Gun to your head, I've got the Matrix here, and then I've got fucking Citizen Kane, or I've got the Matrix and Doctor Strangelove, or I've got the Matrix and Goodfellas." I don't know. I'm talking about some of the most classic films of all time. Are you saying that you would say the Matrix is superior to all of them?
Matrix is in that category for sure. It holds up. I mean, there's so many of those things. They're good for different. I mean, I love Doctor Strangelove so much. That's probably I love everything Kubrick, but I love Doctor Strange. Gentlemen, you can't fight here. This is a war room. Like, there's just so much that's great about
bodily
that movie.
fluids.
He's he'll look at he'll see the big board, just like. So like I don't know if I could say unequivocally but there's many. I think there are many perfect movies. There's not just one. There are many movies that have been done, not every one of them, but there are a lot of movies that can be up in that rank of like, this is just a very, very finely crafted piece of art, and The Matrix is certainly worthy of being in that category.
Okay, so in your list of, we love lists here on this show, your Mount Rushmore +1 or your top 10, The Matrix makes those lists easily?
Oh, for sure. Probably top 5, I think. It maybe at the bottom of the 5, but it's certainly up there.
I don't know if I've ever asked you, what is your favorite movie of all time?
I don't know.
This seems highly inappropriate at this time, Johnny.
Gary, shut up. We'll fix it in post. Don't worry about it.
Might be Star Wars. I don't know. It might be Star Wars or Empire, or it's tough. I don't know if I have a favorite, because every movie appeals to me in a different way. You know what I mean? So there's Wrath of Khan has its own thing, but
Into Darkness.
It's The Matrix is that's obviously way better. Look at the lens flare. But
in 25% of the movie, it's in.
Could you like bullet time dodge the lens flare as it's coming at you?
Now, that'd be a hell of a movie.
Would be. It would be. So what's everyone else's? Sorry, we're hearing with Luke's here. I think we can collectively say that the first one is the best out of the trilogy. Does anybody disagree with that? Just open to anyone.
I mean, I think it's the tightest story, like, because it's designed to be a one movie arc. So I think that really helps tighten it up. Like Luke was saying with Star Wars, like The Empire Strikes Back, probably film wise is the best movie, but like the original one has a complete story arc, so that it feels like you finished,
self-contained.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because just like Star Wars, The Matrix was this kind of revolutionary sci-fi special effects extravaganza that had kind of heady existential themes in it. And then it became so big that it turned from this one-off movie into this trilogy. And just like how Empire and Jedi are kind of part 1 and part 2, and they're almost disconnected from Star Wars: A New Hope, you can see that with The Matrix too, where it's like The Matrix is its own thing, and then Reloaded and Revolutions are kind of a part 1 and part 2. And you can see this was a post facto. This was after the first movie was so big, they came back and they said, okay, how can we extrapolate on these storylines and these themes that we've set up? And they kind of stretch it out into these 2 other movies that are almost their own thing. You know what I mean? They're connected to the source material and the fact that they've got the same characters and they're in the same universe, but the storyline in Empire basically starts in Empire and resolved in Jedi, and the storyline for The Matrix 2 and 3 starts in Reloaded with why are we in the Matrix, with part 3 is how do we get out of the Matrix?
Yeah.
And how do we resolve this conflict between the machines and the humans?
And you can kind of tell that, like, in trilogies that are meant to be trilogies, like The Lord of the Rings, just the way the story
Lord of the Rings,
moves, and also is written by one of the greatest writers, but like, the way that story moves is much different than like, the Matrix trilogy, which is like, a complete run, and then it almost feels like a little hitch in your get up, and then you get the second two stories to it.
Yeah, precisely. And so outside of just the story itself being the tightest, and this one, piggybacking off what Luke said, where not a single shot was wasted, things like that. Was this movie perfectly cast? That's another big question that we have to ask ourselves, because if you go back and you read, we see that Will Smith was originally supposed to play Neo. They had Sean Connery was originally supposed to play Morpheus. Sandra Bullock was originally supposed to play Trinity. Not counting all the other A-listers that they probably brought this movie to. Do we think that Carrie-Anne Moss, Lawrence Fishburne, and Keanu Reeves were the perfect people to help the Wachowskis take this to the mainstream and make it a bullet point of not only action sci-fi cinema, but cinema in general moving forward? What do you guys think? Any disagreement that this was not the perfect casting?
What happened and couldn't have happened any other way.
Perfect.
Well, I literally was just rewatching the first one before this tonight, and I was just noticing how the minor APOC, Switch, Mouse, Tank, Dozer, like how all those minor characters are so much more memorable than the minor ones in 2 and 3. Right. And I think whatever the cast, again, it might be just that lightning in the bottle. It was just the right people in the right place at the right time. But like I remember watching the movie the first time, and like Tank was my favorite. Like he killed Cypher. He was the technician. Like he was like my favorite character. And I was so bummed out in the second one when they didn't bring Tank back because he wanted more money or whatever. And they're like, this is his brother Logos, and he's like a dollar store version of Tank. But like the casting in the first one, definitely, like just that scene with Mouse, when Mouse is sitting him and he's like, so I see you met the woman in the red dress, if you want, just little moments like that where it's like, boy, that's good. Every little moment of that is so well acted. So could Sandra Bullock, I mean, who else would have done it? It's sort of like when David Chase was saying like he would have considered Ray Liotta for Tony Soprano, and it's like, but like who else but James Gandolfini could have done Tony Soprano? Like, yeah, that would have been, Ray Liotta's great, but like, look what we would have missed out on.
And like, which was it? Apex, the one that was in all white in the first one, or was that
APOC? Was the one Switch was the blonde chick, the punk rock blonde chick? Yeah, with the short
Switch
hair.
Was the not, and
then
like
APOC was like her ponytail.
Okay, yeah. So like Switch, like
not like this.
Yeah. Well, why was she wearing all white? I mean, that's a very significant color, especially when everyone else is wearing all black. And like we never explore that, So it's just very interesting, like how much characters that they were willing to just throw away, like, and they felt that comfortable with it.
She's still, Switch and APOC and Mouse are still more memorable than Ghost and Niobe and Commander, whatever. You know what I mean? Like the side characters we see in 2 and 3
Admiral
are
Bone
so forgettable. Yeah.
Did you know? And that's the shitty thing about, and we talk about this on a lot of other episodes, how it bugs us that Hollywood producers have too much pull when it comes to the films, and it takes away from the traction that the initial movie made with the second, third, fourth, however many they make moving forward. Because after the success of the first one, producers did come in and started having more pull, and they added in Jada Pinkett Smith, and they added in I don't remember the name of the actor that plays the commander, but another well-known thespian. Actually, he was a big Shakespearean actor. But they took out all those side actors you're talking about, Luke, because they didn't have the money to pay for the raises to those other people. They had to pay for Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, Lawrence Fishburne, and then all the new actors that they were bringing in to try to make it. Yeah, exactly. And so the budget got bigger, but the payroll for the cast got bigger too. And like you said, the special effects payroll got bigger as well.
And you can see the producer thinking, because I was rewatching the second one earlier this afternoon, and you can see moments where it's like, if this fight sequence wasn't here, this would be the pacing would be a lot better, because there's some interesting conversation with the Merovingian, the conversation in the beginning when they're at the meeting. There's so many times where you can see where, like, as an audience member, I'm watching the second one and I can see like, okay, I'm almost positive the producer said, it's been 30 minutes. We need a fight sequence with kung fu moves because that's what people liked about the first one. Not understanding that like it wasn't just the awesome fight sequence. And that's what bogged the second and third ones down, was you could tell that they built the plot around the action almost. Whereas like we need to have this fight scene and this fight, we need to have a 30-minute chase sequence on the highway with the motorcycles. And it's like they didn't flow organically from the plot. It was like the plot was constructed around having these set pieces. And I don't know the story, but I can almost guarantee you that was some producer somewhere saying, hey, we got to have some fight scenes. That's what people loved about fight scenes and car chases and special effects. You can't have conversations in bars. Audiences are stupid. They don't
Everyone
like
from the
that.
20s. Yeah.
They don't want to listen to a guy in a
That's my
chair.
generic. It's my out of touch corporate man. Hey, friend, we need to put women back on the floor. Just that's my voice for out of touch Hollywood producer who pretends to know a lot more than he does.
Sure. So I mean, outside of that cast being the script being so tight and the cast being so well, and I think we've all, there's a lot of actors in Hollywood we made fun of for a long time, and then over the years we've gone back and we've really seen these actors own up to who they are, and they end up being really badass people too. And in particular, I'm talking about Nicolas Cage and Keanu Reeves, and they're really good at doing what they do. And they only do films that allow them to do what they do nowadays. You know, Keanu Reeves, he's got 2 different types of characters he can play, and he sticks to those, and he owns
Tom Cruise
it.
is that same way.
Yeah, sure. Tom Cruise could be thrown in there as well. You know,
He's got a certain thing he can do, and he just knows how to make sure that he chooses those roles. You know,
Nicolas Cage
and I think
takes any damn movie that'll pay him $5,000. What are you talking about?
But the thing, Gary, is the movies that pay him $5,000 are really, really shitty usually. Outside of Mandy, Ian, and honestly, he does really well with them because he can just be insane and he can just be fucking crazy, and he's great at that. He's so good at portraying that.
Lieutenant, right? He was in that Bad Lieutenant remake where he's like banging that dude's wife on the ground in front of him, like just off the rails craziness.
I didn't even know about that.
You didn't know that? He was
I didn't.
He was in a remake of that Harvey Keitel Bad Lieutenant.
Oh, okay. Holy shit. So I think if we brought in
was it a remake? I thought it was just another movie by the same name.
Oh, well, I thought it was a thematic, remake.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Corrupt cop.
It was the spiritual successor.
Yeah. I don't know, to answer that question from earlier, I don't know if we would have actually appreciated having an actor like a Will Smith or like a different leading A-lister from the late 90s, early 2000s being Neo. I think that Neo didn't need to be an amazingly gifted or overacted part. You know, honestly, I always thought the best actors in that series were Hugo Weaving and Lawrence Fishburne. Hugo Weaving in particular.
If it had been Will Smith, because this was part of his contracts at the time in the late 90s, was he wanted rights to the soundtrack. That was part of his deals. That's why like when Wild Wild West came out, when Men in Black came out, like it was the Will Smith. And so could you imagine how awful the Matrix soundtrack would have been if it had been a Will Smith?
And also Will Smith just wouldn't have nailed the part right. Like it was really good for him to go to.
Have you ever seen, like on his YouTube, and I've talked about this before on this podcast, he's talked about the pitch he got from the Wachowski brothers and like why he turned down that role. And it's very clear, even in that video, he still doesn't quite get the Matrix. And he's like, he's really trying to kind of cover himself for the first one. But he goes like, yeah, they came in and they were like, man, we're going to have like spinning cameras and you're going to be doing stuff. And I was like, nah. And it was just this super elementary, like you're watching him talk about it and you're thinking like, I don't think he read that script and he didn't get it. And he was like, these guys are weird. Fuck that. And that was about where it was. And I think part of the reason that cast works is, say what you want about them, but I think they all got it. They all got what the movie was. They all got what their roles were. They all understood what the Wachowskis were trying to do. And that leads to a lot of it is that the actors have to buy into, what it is, and they have to understand what their little part in the machine is and not view it as just this vehicle for promotion.
Yeah, and but Will Smith, he doesn't like he was much better for Wild Wild West because he needed to have a part that was kind of a somewhat comedic
Smartass.
foil to, Kevin Kline's Straight Man, whereas like that would not have worked at all for Neo. That would have been god awful.
Yeah, that would have.
The closest you could have gotten would have been like his Men in Black, and again, it's comedic foil. He's comedic against Agent K, who's this kind of straight-laced, by the book, hard-ass dude. So like you don't really have that dynamic. Like Neo has to be taken seriously. You know what I mean?
Like Morpheus would have been the straight man.
Yeah, and that would have.
There's no comedic interaction between them. Like there's no Morpheus is a mentor. There's no conflicting dynamic. It's Neo respects Morpheus, Morpheus respects Neo. It's not like the dynamic that Will Smith has in those other two movies, where it's this sort of this disparaging comedic sort of he's playing on them for being stuck up. And I don't know. I mean, maybe he's a good enough actor, but I think he's right that there's that comedic foil element is typically what Will Smith leans on a lot, and I just don't know if that if you could even put that in this movie and have it, nonetheless have it work.
Yeah,
sorry, he admitted himself that he is like that it better with Keanu.
There you go.
That like the movie itself wouldn't have been as good with him in it.
Not every action movie. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I was going to say what I was boiled it down to when I'm thinking of Will Smith trying to play the role of Neo. So after he starts learning everything and he kind of turns to Morpheus and he's like, I know Kung Fu. Keanu Reeves kind of played that as like, I know this now. If it had been Will Smith, he'd have been like, no, man, I know Kung Fu. Like, it would have been like a comedic moment. It would have just been
Cue
really
the dance number.
Yep. It's like, I know Kung Fu. I know Kung Fu. Like, it just would have been really fucking weird.
Well, it's funny because it was kind of a comedic moment, but it was more of a like, holy shit, I'm so experienced. I know fucking Kung Fu. Like it was supposed to be kind of an out of this world. So there was a minor comedic element to it, but it was in the subtlety. It was in the normal person. It's this computer programmer being like, oh my God, I know Kung Fu. Not like, well, and I almost thought Will Smith might have played it like a badass, like just looked at him like all hard and been like, I know Kung Fu. Like I'm about to beat your ass. And not portraying like, holy shit, this is crazy. This is this is fish out of water territory for Neo. He's a computer programmer, and now he's become a Kung Fu master in a couple of hours. And that line has to kind of encapsulate all that. That's sort of like, this is crazy, but this is also, there's that weird bit of confidence. And I don't know if that delivery would have come across.
You know what? The scene where Morpheus jumps across the building and Neo's like, whoa. He would have been like, damn.
Damn, what you got on rocket pants?
It's very possible. That is very Will Smith.
We hope that you are enjoying this rousing episode of Let Feather Productions' I Don't Give a Flick. To help us bring you more of the content that you love, please consider following us on Patreon at patreon.com/letfeather. There are 3 tiers to choose from, with special and exclusive merchandise in our VIP level. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
Neil, I was curious on this one for you when I was reading this. You're probably the biggest Sean Connery fan I know, especially out of this group. What do you think would have happened if Sean Connery had played Morpheus and not Lawrence Fishburne?
I mean, I don't even want to think about what that would have been like. I do love Sean Connery, but
let's hear the voice. Let's hear the voice.
Great in that role. I don't know, like the random Scottish accent from a civilization that shouldn't have accents from coming out of the Matrix, like, just wouldn't make sense.
It wouldn't, and I don't think they needed to do that at all. Going with those big A-listers, and it's the same thing with, as much as I enjoy Sandra Bullock, Carrie-Anne Moss was perfectly fine to play the role of Trinity. I don't necessarily think the acting performances in this series are what needed to carry it. It's like what you guys were talking about with not having that comedic element. Well, not every movie needs to have comedic sides here and there. A lot of films do that. There's a lot of mixes with horror and drama and fucking romance and whatever, and they always have one comedic actor that kind of just has a quick live here and there and then moves on to the next thing. And there was none of that in The Matrix, barely at all.
Yeah, the only funny guy in The Matrix was the his name, Joe Pesci, not Joe Pesci though.
Joe Pantoliano. Joe Pantoliano.
Yeah, he was the lighthearted,
Joey Pants.
comedic element of the movie, but he was not like it was like up to a 2, not to an 11.
I don't know. I thought the Oracle was pretty funny.
You'll feel better after you eat your cookie.
What is that voice?
I don't know. Because I got confused because they switch oracles in the movie between 2 and 3.
The other one died.
Well, I didn't say they didn't have a good reason.
Okay. Another thing that I had really liked about the first movie in particular, which obviously carried through to all 3, but you notice it in the first one. I'm sure at some point in the history of cinema before The Matrix came out, other movies have done it. But Ian, you and I always talk about color palette, and green was the tint that they used through every single shot of the film. In fact, on some of the cameras, they even experimented with actual green film over the lens on every shot instead of even putting it in a post. Then they realized that was a dumb idea and
we'll fix it in post. That's fine.
Right. Well, I mean, I thought that they had attempted that, but only on shots or scenes that occurred inside the Matrix. I thought anytime they were outside of it, they removed that
blue
from
was
it.
That was probably the primary color.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was supposed to be the code, right? It was the idea was it was the code that sort of you're living in the world of the coding.
Yeah. So, a green filter was used. It was used on all scene shots of the Matrix. So they were trying to give it the otherworldly feel, basically, as kind of like, from what I was reading, you're supposed to see it kind of like you're seeing the movie through a monitor. And actually they removed the color blue from everything we see in the Matrix. Yeah. So Michael, you're right. It was in when you're actually in the Matrix is when you see that. And then that blue comes back when they are in Zion and when they're actually going to the robot city and trying to fight him and such.
Because they established that palette with the Matrix constantly. Every time you see the Matrix, it's black, high contrast, green text coming down. The black is the background and the data. Essentially, the input from the Matrix is the green data, and so you can see why they would want to put that filter on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump over to the second one. Let's jump over to the Matrix Reloaded. I'll give a quick synopsis on this one. This one this one was actually probably my favorite fight scene between the Ghost Twins and the combo of Morpheus, Neo, and Trinity. I just love how the Ghost Twins, they at any point you could try to kick them and they would just turn into this translucent figure that's floating, and you would go right through them, and then they would turn back into a solid form and then whoop your ass really quick with those sweet little swishy knives they had. I don't even know what the hell you'd refer to them as. But essentially, the Matrix Reloaded happened about 6 months after the event of the first Matrix. During this time, Neo's powers have continued to grow and grow. The agents have become more aware of what's happening. And over time, we slowly start to see Agent Smith is not dead. Actually, we end up finding out that he is a virus inside of the Matrix that has continued to get stronger and stronger, just as Neo is getting stronger and stronger. Once again, same thing as like that contrast of good and evil, the yin to the yang.
A diode in the Force.
And they're both growing rapidly at the same time. Neo's growing powerful through one singular organism, or some might say the entire Matrix or the entire world, the existence of humankind. And then you come out and you see Agent Smith, who's growing more powerful because he is a virus and continuously infecting people by shoving his hand into their chest and turning them into him. And as he says, it's always nice to see me. Love that line. Anyways, basically, we see Neo constantly dispatching agents left and right with no problem at all. He's basically fighting 3, 4, 5 of them at a time with one hand behind his back, and it's just boring for him. At this point, we're introduced to the city of Zion, and we actually get to see a world in detail outside of the Matrix. We actually see what the real world is supposed to be, and we actually get to meet the few 100,000 or million people that live in Zion. This is where we actually start to see world building which you guys always know that's one of my favorite things. We get to meet people that were born outside of the Matrix. We get to meet people that share their stories of being unplugged from the Matrix and living in society and not being a part of the army or not being a part of their I guess their scavengers, their military forces, whatever they refer to themselves as. And at this point, we're introduced to people like Niobe and the commander. And basically, there is. God, I'm trying to remember. Y'all are welcome to help me fill in the blanks if I miss anything. Basically, they are trying to find the keymaker at this point. The keymaker has the keys to every doorway within the Matrix system. And they're trying to get access to him, and he's currently being held hostage by one of the more powerful, I guess, pieces of software the Matrix has created. It's not an actual human. It's essentially I guess a robot, if you will, an AI, I suppose. And what was the Merovingian? That's what his name was. Yeah. And so basically, Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity go to his location and they try to bargain with him to get the release of the keymaker. They believe the keymaker can help them open the doors that they need to free everybody from the Matrix and bring it toppling to the ground. The Merovingian says, no, he's mine, and basically ensues my favorite fight scene, which lasts for like 30 to 40 minutes. It has some badass motorcycle chases across the highways. We see Morpheus almost single-handedly be the only person outside of Neo to take down an agent, even though he technically gets bested. It was still a pretty even match. He had to use a katana to get the better of the agent, but not a problem.
Good showing.
Yeah, good showing. Good show, old chap. Good show. Round of applause. And so, at this point, we begin to see more from the Oracle. The Oracle begins to divulge information to Neo that at some point he's going to have to choose between, between his life and the life of Trinity's. And towards the end of the movie, we see that he does have to make that choice. But since he is all powerful, he ends up saving both of them. Here towards the end. And then at the very end, we actually are divulge even more information about the Matrix, where Neo meets the architect or one of the architects of the current Matrix. And we learn that there have been multiple Neos and there have been multiple architects and there's been multiple versions of the Matrix throughout the amount of time that the robots
I think there's just the one architect, isn't there?
Yeah,
I thought
it was one architect.
Are you sure it was one? I thought they mentioned that there were multiple architects.
No, there's multiple. There's multiple
several
versions of the Matrix that they've tried over time. So the big thing was they had to get the Oracle told Neo and them, hey, in order to do this, you've got to get to the source. So that's why they had to get the keymaker, was in order to get to the source.
And the Oracle sent him after the keymaster.
Right, and so they end up getting the keymaker, all that. They end up getting Neo ends up getting into the source, and that's when he meets the architect who explains some of the history behind it and saying that you're just the equation. Like you're part of the equation.
To balance
the agent,
it out.
Yep,
Yeah.
everything is being balanced
Very
out.
reminiscent of 1984, where Winston goes in with the agent, and he learns that Goldstein and all of it is just another level of control. That same thing is that he had thought that he was part of this resistance and that Goldstein was out there, and then in sort of Act 3 he learns the truth that Goldstein isn't real and it's just another way for the system to control them. And Neo comes to that same realization. He goes to the center point and he realizes that the one doesn't break the system. The one is actually just another part. It's just this higher layer of control that he's a part of.
But Luke, we've always been at war with Oceania.
2 minutes hate. 2 minutes hate. Starting now.
But yeah, and so the Oracle didn't lie to him, and it wasn't necessarily what he thought it was going to end up being. Because yes, he'd end up having to make the choice between is he going to save humanity or is he going to save the one he loves. And the architect telling him that, this has been done 5 times before. You're the 6th iteration of the one, and every other one, it's like, you've got to make a choice. You can either go through this door, we will continue on, we will destroy Zion, but you will have the opportunity to pull so many people out of the Matrix and restart Zion, be able to start rebuilding. We will reboot the Matrix and we'll go into another cycle. Or if you choose the other door, we're going to kill every last man, woman, and child who's alive. outside of the Matrix. It's your choice.
And what's interesting is, was he telling the truth or was that a lie?
Yeah, that's
'Cause
again,
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know.
I guess we might
You
find out.
just- we
But
might
this
hear
is
in
a-
the fourth one.
This is where the cave comes into play,
Yep.
right? And this is the idea that they're talking about earlier. Oh, excuse me. Is that having now free these people? Can you do it? And what's it going to be?
Right. Yeah. like,
Right.
What choice do you make? Because ultimately, the thing that balances out the equation that makes the whole matrix work is having that one person make a choice whenever that equation needs to be balanced, like 60 years or whenever
Right.
it is.
But that's also the beauty of because I really like the second movie as well, and it probably is my favorite of the
same.
three. That's why I like the beauty of earlier in the film when the Merovingian tells him when Morpheus says everything is a choice, and the Merovingian says
Right.
no, it's incorrect. Choice is an illusion created between those who have power and those who have none.
Say it like the Merovingian.
No.
Exactly. Those have power.
Do
And
the
that was
accent.
Do
just
it.
the whole point. was,
Do
like
it. Do
they had
something.
to have this illusion. It was a 99% compliance rate. Once there was some illusion of choice, even if it was on the most primal, subconscious level, but they still had to deal with that 1%. They still had to come up with a control system for the outliers, and that was what the one was. But it's also interesting is that the Merovingian, of course he would say that because he's a computer program. His entire existence is based on binary true and false,
It's a
master
code.
and slave. And so he can't, and the Oracle says this in part 3, she says he can't understand, the architect doesn't understand choice. And the Merovingian is the same way. Their computer software systems, they don't understand choice. So I think that it's sort of like having the dumb character espouse a philosophy. You see the Merovingian saying this thing, and it's to me as the audience member, you're watching it and you're like, this isn't quite true. This is what he thinks. This isn't what the movie is trying to say.
I don't know if I'd necessarily say the dumb character. It's
Not the character who's the movie. The Merovingian is not the character you're supposed to agree with.
yeah, and
Is an antagonistic, and so the philosophy is being presented as the antagonistic philosophy, not this is the message of the movie.
Yeah, because one of the easiest ways to identify an antagonist in the film is who doesn't grow and change. That gives you sort of your basic, this is the antagonist, and not understanding that there is a choice to be made and what choice is. I think kind of reinforces that. And I would say that the architect scene and the Merovingian scene to me were much more tense and thrilling than the 40-minute car chase scene on the freeway.
The action sequences.
Yeah, because those,
Absolutely.
like when he's just sitting there
Absolutely.
like flicking his little pen,
And he's just breaking down everything you believed is a lie.
Yeah.
You've been doing exactly. It's just so. But Gary, you and I are Star Trek fans, and so I think we
Yes,
and
yeah.
Michael too. But we appreciate that more cerebral, heady, slow burn kind of stuff. And maybe we're in the minority on that. But full caveat, that might be tainting our perception a little bit.
True.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that just that final scene was not tantalizing at all, and it didn't get me on the edge of my seat waiting for the third one. Absolutely not. But if I was to pick something out of that, I would say the most memorable portion for me was definitely that 40-minute action sequence, because it was probably the longest to that date that I had actually seen one, to be quite
See,
honest.
and I bet you it's the same for Gary, but for me, the thing that I remember walking out from The Matrix 2 was I was just kept thinking about the architect scene over and over again. I was just like, holy shit, what does this mean? What does this mean for the third one? What does this mean for the first one? I couldn't remember any of the action sequences, but I remembered very vividly that architect sequence. So it kind of goes to that point that there was different parts of it that spoke.
Yeah, because it just dumped a huge load of
It's
thought.
clearly the climax.
Oh God, it's so much information in like 10 minutes, not even that, less than that.
Right.
I mean,
Well, it's the climax, right? Like the climax is not I mean, there's a simultaneous climax going on with the fight over the power plant and stuff, but I mean, the real climax of the story is the confrontation
It's right
with the
there.
architect.
Yeah, I don't think there's any dispute in that. But really quick, Michael, I wanted to run to you before we continue down this path. You had said earlier when I said, I think we all think the first one is the best. You didn't speak up, so I'm surprised you didn't. You're saying the second one was your favorite. Why is that?
I think the second one just holds more memory for me.
Okay.
The first one obviously set up the premise, set up the world. It was the one story, one off, like, hey, this can stand on its own. It's almost like the opening part. What's the word I'm looking for? The prelude, the
Prologue.
The prologue.
Right.
Thank you. It's like the prologue to the story that's happening itself. And so the second movie felt like, okay, now we're getting off with the story. Like, we have the base information to get us started. Now let's get moving. And the second one for me holds a lot of memory because of the time in my life when I saw it, the people that I saw it with, but also just how interesting the movie was to me, because I was really big into duality at the time, and like what's good, what's evil, what's a balance in life, just everything about that was so interesting to me. And maybe it was because I was in chemistry at the time and we were having to do so much with like balancing equations, was why this was so interesting to me. But I really enjoyed the second movie, and a lot of people were very put off by the pacing of that movie because, as Lucas was saying, you do have that what feels like the producer coming in being like, more action, more fighting, and that's what the people want.
If they're not talking, they're not laughing.
Exactly. And it definitely has that feel to it. Looking back, you can see that, okay, maybe this doesn't have exactly the same feel as the first one, but at the time there was something about the flow of that movie that just felt good to me. That was like, here's our 40, our 30 to 40 minutes of philosophy, 30 to 40 minutes of action, 30, 40 minutes of philosophy, 30, 40 minutes of action. Like, it just started to flow really, again, it was that balance, that duality, that everything kind of balances out in the end. And that's how the movie felt looking at it as a whole. I don't think everybody felt that way, obviously, because of critiques of it. But for me, at that time in my life, I really, really enjoyed that movie. And I think that's why the second one holds such a near and dear place in my heart. Plus, the Merovingian is in it, and I'm fucking obsessed with everything having to do with the Merovingian. So it's talked about like the architect scene being the big thing you walk out of the movie remembering, or that 40-minute fight scene between the Merovingian's mansion all the way to the end on the highway is what I remember. Nope, it's the entire restaurant scene with the Merovingian. Like, I absolutely loved everything about that.
Yeah, it was funny. We had talked about, Luke, you had brought up that the secondary characters were a lot weaker in the second and third. And while you're probably right on the larger scale, I would have to say that I don't know. I don't want to say the antagonists were stronger in the second one because they literally just added a second one with Merovingian. But I've always loved it when movies do that, when they start to split their storylines off and each storyline is just as strong as the other. And I agree with you, Michael. I feel that you're talking about two storylines going at once. I thought the one between the Merovingian and technically the Keymaker, that storyline with Trinity and Morpheus, and then Agent Smith and Neo, I thought those were, even though they interconnected, I thought they were both just as strong as the other. And it was cool. I like it when movies kind of go off the beaten path and they try to make two stories work at once.
Right. And
one of
the secondary characters that I remember the most from the second movie is actually Persephone, and her role as the Merovingian's partner, and how the Merovingian is saying all of these things and doing all of these things, but then she's just going to step in and throw a wrench into the thing, saying, it's just for fun. Haha, have fun, honey. Mainly because he was doing other stuff behind her back, but that's neither here nor there. But she was a very interesting character, and that conversation that she had with Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus in the bathroom when she's like, he's such an asshole, he's done all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I'll help you, but you have to kiss me first. And Trinity just saying, excuse me, like as straight as she can, just points the gun. Excuse me.
Do you remember when he gave that girl the cake?
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
explains an orgasm in detail.
I don't pretend to understand the female sexual response. I'm probably not the the expert on this one.
Out of this entire group, probably the least.
Probably the least, but I remember going to see that movie with, at the time, my girlfriend. Interestingly enough, my girlfriend, going to see this movie, and that scene comes in, and the Merovingians like, look at her, look, it's in the cake, da da da, and what it all boils down to is we're completely out of control. I swear to God, I thought he gave her diarrhea. I thought he made her shit her pants and she had to get up and go to the bathroom. It never crossed my mind that would have been an orgasm. Like, I was like, oh no, he made her shit her pants. That was rude.
Will Smith, get
so
out of here.
rude.
It's not a Jack Black movie. Oh my God.
Yeah, it took my girlfriend explaining that to me later, and I'm so sorry that had to happen.
That I would have to say that was, it's probably overall, it's one of the better sequels in my opinion. It's one of the overall better ones. And the more and more that we're talking about this too, and I'm remembering, because that's probably the one that I've seen the least over the last 5-6 years of like rewatching, is for some reason that one doesn't come on TV for me as much as the first or Revolutions does. Excuse me. But it definitely was. I think it's one of the stronger ones for sure. So Ian, we kind of wanted to pull you back into the combo here. We lost Neil for a second for some technical difficulties, but was there anything that stood out to you in the second one in particular that we didn't mention that you really loved, or was the second one your least favorite out of the trilogy?
Well, 2 and 3 are pretty much neck and neck for me. I don't really put one above the other. I do want to say everything y'all just said about, especially the Merovingian and the Keymaker and all that. I actually disagree. I didn't really like that. I wanted to, at least. I mean, I think that it just kind of like took a strong left turn, and it all of a sudden was something else, which is what you were saying. What you liked about it, I disliked it. It seemed to be distracting for me, I guess. However, I do appreciate the nod to Greek mythology with the Merovingian. Like, he's basically Hades, and his wife or his girl or whatever
is Persephone, who was the queen of the underworld.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And in Greek mythology, he just snatched her up, basically, and made her his queen. And that's why in the Matrix, Persephone is like hates him. Basically, I mean, it's kind of like I that's what I appreciate about it. But the whole thing with the Keymaker, everybody like has a title and everything. That everybody just is this unique other computer program that weren't mentioned at all in the first movie. I don't know. It didn't sit well with me, but
it's a little less grounded.
They're mentioning a lot of, and I do understand what you're saying. They did not reference that a ton in the first one, but like I was saying with the world building in the second, they're alluding to the fact that we're all just kind of part of the machine, and especially the software that's a part of that machine is part of that machine. That's why everybody has those specific names, and I appreciated the reference they were making to that. But and that's just that's just me. So go ahead, keep going.
Well, yeah. So like I appreciate it, but for me, it just didn't, I guess, pull off well enough. Like,
sure,
the execution, I guess, is what I didn't like. But although I did really like the architect, though.
Yeah. I think we can all agree that his point was pretty great. Did anybody ever see Gary? I don't know. You're the one that showed me this.
Yeah, the VH1 Awards with Will Ferrell and
the MTV Awards. Sean William Scott.
Yeah.
And Will Ferrell plays the architect.
Yeah, that is a wonderful spoof on that. And there's there's another one. Who did it? Oh, George Carlin.
Yeah, the other one was George Carlin in Scary Movie. It's like, how long have you been in this room? Just me in this chair.
Oh God, that's how you know it's a great film. We can just parody it for years after it's done. Gary, let's jump over to the Matrix Revolutions. Can you give us a little breakdown on that one, and then your thoughts?
So one of the big plot elements in the second one was there's a guy named Payne in the real world.
The third one, but.
Right, but he gets taken over in the second one because he's one of the people that lives in Zion, and he goes in to fight with the Matrix, and Agent Smith takes him over. And so when he leaves the Matrix, both he and Neo are unconscious. So it's kind of like you really start to see that Smith there's another level of him being sort of the mirror image or the foil to Neo, because he's now doing to Neo's world what Neo did to his world by entering it. And so he works against the people of Zion while they try and do their defense. I think that so basically in the third one, they are waiting for Neo to wake up, and they're trying to save him because his consciousness has been taken to an area that's not in the Matrix quite like. It's like secluded from it. So they have to get in touch with the Merovingian and, take his train to rescue him. And then once Neo gets back, they go to the source code to try and resolve the issue, while at the same time the machines are sending 150,000, or it's exactly equal to however many people there are machines to go kill. Sorry?
250.
250,000, even better, to go kill everybody in Zion. So they're tunneling through trying to get to it. And for me, the whole big defend the city kind of thing, I think they did it a lot better in like Lord of the Rings with Gondor. And I think it really, it really for me pulled away from the Matrix. But there's a lot of it of like, we got to defend the city and like fight it to the last man, woman, and child, which, they do. And they've got these really cool like mecha things that have machine guns, and they're shooting at these automatons of death. And then the Matrix is sort of overwhelmed by Agent Smith. Like, he's completely infected everyone. He takes over the Oracle. He takes over everyone. So everything is Agent Smith. And so
he becomes the Matrix.
Yeah, he's completely corrupted the program. So in route to the Deus Ex Machina of the movie, the ship that Trinity and Neo are on is damaged, if I'm remembering this correctly, and Trinity it dies.
Yeah, they fly up and see the sun for the first time, and then fall directly into the robot city in the heart of it.
Which there's another fucking Greek myth. What's
Icarus,
that one? Hercules. Oh, okay.
No, Icarus. Flew too close to the sun.
And so Trinity dies, and this time she doesn't come back. Or does she? I don't know. She's in the trailer for the new movie.
We'll get to that in a second.
And then Neo goes back into the Matrix for the last time. Everything's taken over by Agent Smith, and they have this really cool Dragon Ball Z battle that takes a long time. It's got a lot of really beautifully dramatic lines. I used to, whenever it's raining hard, I'll go outside and say them to nobody but myself.
Mr. Anderson, we missed you.
Yeah, I'd actually, Matt Peroni and I would actually do that back and forth in high school.
Yes, I remember. I remember. Y'all were so cool.
We still are
just
cool.
The coolest. Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, just got cool cats.
And in the end, Neo comes to understand that he needs to surrender so this program can complete. And so Smith finally beats him down to the ground, and Neo's getting back up because he's got a heart of a champion, and he doesn't want to give up. And then Smith says he calls him Neo for the first time, because he always only called him Mr. Anderson, which is his which is his Matrix name, his dead name. And so he says everything that has a beginning has an end, Neo. And that's when Neo kind of realizes, you're right. It does have to have an end. And so he stops fighting and lets Agent Smith take him over. Agent Smith knows something's wrong, but like he does it anyway, because it's like, I have to do this. And once Neo's taken over, the source program kind of resets everything and deletes the virus. And like it ends with the Oracle back. Different lady, but same character.
And the architect.
And the architect, and they're in a park, and that's the first time you see green grass, or any plant life inside the Matrix. And it's got a very ambiguous ending where they're like, the Oracle asks the architect, are you going to let people go, like out of the Matrix? And he's like, those who want to go. And then they carry Neo's body off, and you have a lot of very, very clear religious imagery of sort of the Jesus figure, the savior, the sacrificial lamb, and that concludes the first trilogy. Did I miss anything?
No, I'm trying to think, because at the very end, when the architect and the Oracle are talking, I think the architect asks her, "How long do you think this piece will last?" And I'm trying to remember if she said as long as it has to or as long as it can.
I think it's as long as
I thought
it
as
can.
long as it has. Was it? I thought it was as long as it has to.
I thought
actually.
it was as long as it has to as well, which I thought was
Yeah.
all because, and I remember that because I thought it was kind of interesting. That I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean has to? Like, there's more here.
Mhm.
Like, I thought that they were trying to build up to keep the whole thing going.
I did appreciate that the movie, because it came out only 6 months after Reloaded did. So normally movies will wait like a year, and they'll be like, okay, this is a summer movie. It comes out, May 25th, every year. And then, because I think at the same time Lord of the Rings was going, Hugo Weaving really had a good couple of years there, didn't he? And like this one came out like 6 months afterwards, so you didn't really have to wait that long to conclude the story, which was really neat. And they put out a lot of like content between then, like the Animatrix and video games and all that. So it was neat.
Yeah. And so I see, here's the thing. I was talking with Luke and Ian about this earlier. I was, not that I pay a lot of attention to Rotten Tomatoes or anything like that anymore, but I will go to them to see where they rate things. And the third one got a 35% rating.
Yeah.
And
35%?
I just thought I thought it was completely unfair. I thought, it was certainly, in my opinion, it was the weakest of the three, but I still thought it was in the 60s. I really did.
Yeah,
I still thought it
35%
was in the
is
60s.
ridiculous for that. Are you kidding me?
That is ridiculous to that. I understand that maybe the Zion battles they tried to make it interesting, but it wasn't quite as interesting as the actual Matrix story itself with Neo and Smith. I get it. But they still had to build the world. They still had to put some eyes on it. They still had to give some information out to it, and I was really pissed when I read that, honestly, because I did not think I thought it was the weakest of the three, but I don't think it was that much worse than Reloaded, and I loved Reloaded. I thought Reloaded was great. I don't know. Did you guys find the third one to be by far the weakest, or was it not really that far of a drop off from the first two?
I will say this real quick. I have just checked it live here on HBO Max. The response to how long can this piece last? As long as it can.
Okay, it was as long as it can.
That's
All
what
right, I was
that's
right.
what the Oracle's response
I'm so
was.
smart.
As long as it can. And Gary, you didn't mention this, but I took this when Smith says everything. When he calls him Neo, and I think this was even mentioned. I always took that as that was the Oracle talking through Smith. And then because the Oracle was the one who always called him Neo. And then right after that, you see Smith kind of shake it off. He doesn't really know what happened. He's like, what's this?
Right.
And then he even starts to say these visions might be a trick, which to me is saying he understands that the Oracle, he doesn't have full power, because that's obviously the Oracle Smith that he's talking to, who's become Prime Smith in this universe.
And
so I always took that as basically that was why Neo realized, Smith's got to win, because he realizes the Oracle's talking through Smith. Smith doesn't have this control. This is the way this is supposed to go.
Yeah, and Hugo Weaving does a really good job at that line. I could have expounded on that for a long time, but I was trying to wrap it up. But he does a good job at that line of.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, after he says it, because he's got his sunglasses off at this point, and he kind of does like a little tick with his face, and it really just looks, I don't know, like a human, but like a computer program resetting, like boop, boop. Just that kind of a little blip to his facial structure, the Oracle took control. Okay, now I'm back again. And
now he's back, and that's why he's like, what? He even says, why did he? And so you didn't mention that, but I had always assumed that that's what that was.
Yeah, I would think so, because the one that did that was the one that had been previously the Oracle and then taken over by Smith, and so I think that was probably a key to that.
The new Prime Smith.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, God, You could really go down the rabbit hole if you want to talk about the philosophies of the Matrix, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And if only we had an additional 2 hours.
At
but
least.
back, yeah. And but back to the original question. Did you guys find that this one, because this is the one that critics panned the most. It was not just Rotten Tomatoes. It was a lot of, I mean, Siskel and Ebert at the time, the Times, like if you look at a lot of the articles from back in the early 2000s when this came out, it certainly was the most panned. Still didn't do too bad. I mean, at the box office, it did great. But do you guys think from a fan's perspective, was it a giant drop off from the first two, or was it equally as good, equally as well done?
To me, it felt like it had a lot of bloat in it. Like all of the Zion stuff was not important to me. And I think that it detracted from this storyline that we'd already been following for 2 movies now, which was Neo, Trinity, Morpheus.
Smith. Yeah.
I mean, I know why they put it in there because like that was a big action scene, but like I really like, because it just got too big to me. Like I like it when you keep the story small and personal and you can see what's going on. So to me, all of that, like 45 minutes to an hour and 15 of the movie, just felt like you could just lop that off and make it much tighter and better.
It's kind of like when those movies they switch back and forth between the action adventure trail in the scene or path in the scene in the movie, and then the romance path in the movie, and they switch back and forth. But you know what I mean? And I kind of feel like Zion was that romance path that they chose. It was like, okay, I understand that you kind of need to have this in here to either like humanize the characters or in this case for the world building because they've already talked about it, but it was a little too much. And yeah, they should have. I agree. I think they should have cut down on it by a lot. I think Luke. Once again, I want to bring up what you talked about earlier, that the first one had no shot that was not well done and no shot that didn't mean something. And I think the second one was pretty close to, but this one and the third, it did have a lot of shots and even whole scenes that just didn't need to be there. And it was not at all contributing to the basis of the storyline. Like you could have cut it and nobody would have noticed the difference, So I can certainly agree with that. I will not agree with a 35% rating. That's ludicrous. That's just asinine. But I don't know how did you guys feel about the third one just in general? Ian, what about you? What was your take on it?
Well, like I said, I felt pretty similar about the second one. I did, however, really enjoy the battle scene at Zion, with the mechs and all of that.
Mhm.
Like usually that's something I don't enjoy in a movie, but this one I don't know, I dug it. That's kind of what I always wanted to see in the first movie. I always want to be like, I want to see what Zion looks like, and I love like the battle between man and machine is just a story that's my favorite story. Like the Terminator is my favorite movie of all time. So when you see and that's what I've always wanted to see in the Terminator franchise is the war in the future between man and robots. So I actually got to see that in this one. So that's why I really liked it, because that's what appeals the most to me about the Matrix.
How to see them living side by side.
Yeah,
Right.
that and fighting and just this future society that's mankind is on the brink of extinction, basically. So that's just what appeals to the Matrix most for me.
Yeah.
Other than a simulation theory, but I mean, I totally understand what Gary was getting at. That was definitely like I definitely understand that and get that. I just I don't know, I just liked it. So that's but other than that, like the whole thing with like the little girl in the subway, uh, that I found kind of boring, and I didn't really care too much for that.
Yeah, where he gets trapped in between the worlds. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
guess
mean,
that.
I appreciate where they were going with it, but like I was saying before, the execution just and it didn't really work for me. And he was just talking to his family of computer programs about love and
Yeah.
everything. I was just like, this is just unnecessary.
Michael, how about you? What was your take on the third?
The third one I enjoyed. I think a lot of people. So if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the end of the second one is when they introduced the idea that Neo was able to influence the machines outside of the Matrix just by using his mind, his whatever power he's using. He was able to stop those Sentinels, and that's what knocked
Towards the end,
him.
yeah.
That's what knocked him unconscious. Only to realize that he was back in the Matrix now, but he was not. I don't think he was jacked in at the time. He was completely just what the hell is
Wi-Fi.
going on here? Yeah, like he's Wi-Fi, he's Bluetooth now. And I think a lot of people may have been disappointed because the third one focused so much on, okay, here's this fight with Zion, we've got to go, we've got to stop Agent Smith inside the Matrix, and we've got to do all this. And when they did the philosophy bit in the beginning with the family that was escaping the source and heading towards the Matrix, and that the Merovingian had agreed, and because you see the man in the second movie as he's being led away from the Merovingian before Neo, Trinity, and Morpheus meet him for the first time, that he had made struck some kind of bargain to get what he saw as his family outside of the source and over to the Matrix to join with the Merovingian and his clan as like protecting the exiles. Programs that were destined for deletion when they didn't want to be deleted, they wanted to continue to exist. They spent all that time talking about that, but I don't know if they ever spent enough time trying to explain why Neo was able to do what he was able to do both outside and inside the Matrix after they discovered, like, oh god, you can jack into the Matrix without actually being connected, or you can influence these machines outside of it. Because like when they're flying towards the machine city, at the end, and he just holds out his hand and all of them are just detonating in front of the ship as they're getting closer and closer to the city. Like, it's never really explained why he's able to do that, and I think that left a bit of a sour taste in people's mouth. Now they may,
I thought it would, right?
I mean, they may try and explain some
Wasn't
of it
it?
in the next, but
Well, I think it's that he's kind of like a bridge between the worlds. I mean, going back to
Yeah.
like the whole Jesus metaphor, like of life and death, of
right,
Matrix.
and I agree. I
yeah.
think that's what it is. I think he is that bridge between two worlds, and that's what the chosen one is in this universe. But I don't know if it was explained well enough for audiences where like too much time was spent on the action as opposed to the philosophy behind that. And I think that may have left bad taste in people's mouths. Interestingly enough, I had a friend growing up who had a interesting theory on this, or thought of how interesting, or do you think it would have completely destroyed the movie if it turned out that there wasn't really an army heading for Zion, that the machines weren't really heading down there to kill everybody, that they had this impression that this was going to happen as another level of control over humanity, and that it turned out that the machines were just controlling the power and water and everything else supplied to Zion, and if they ever wanted to, they would just cut the lines, and everybody down there would just suffocate to death. Because why, as a machine, would you do something as inefficient as trying to go into combat when you could just let me flood the tunnels or let me cut the power and they're just going to die on their own?
Or if the machines are in an AI simulation that people are running just to see what machines would do with
that
AI
would be
power.
fucking hysterical, actually.
That would be. That sounds like a Reddit theory if I've ever heard one.
Theory, actually, I've read that theory before.
Oh my god, that's fucking classic. Luke, what about you? What were your feelings on the third and final one?
I'm kind of with Ian. I felt like 2 and 3 are kind of equal. I don't have a preference for one over the other. I think they both kind of suffer from the same shortcomings, which is the same. I felt the same way walking out of 2 and 3 that I felt walking out of the Star Wars prequels, which was like, oh, this is just strange. I don't know what to make of what I've just seen. There's so much weird stuff here. And then in retrospect, I think they both kind of suffered from the same problem, is that there was just too much indulgence on certain things and not enough time taken on other things.
Right.
And so one of the problems, I think, and I think this was Ian, is that, the movie was called The Matrix, and 2 and 3 kind of got away from the Matrix and got into Zion and got into the war. And it's like, I think maybe the focus could have stayed a little bit more on them and their war with the Matrix, and we don't necessarily need to see the Zion rave party, and we don't need to see the politics of the council. You know, Zion, I feel like maybe Zion almost should have been just Coruscant. It's just kind of there. It's a backdrop. You don't need to see all this stuff about it. I like world building too, but I also want to have a story that kind of doesn't waste my time on stuff that is not paid off. And there was a lot of stuff there that it just there was a lot of indulgence in 2 and 3, and I remember just kind of being numb walking out of them, just being like, I just don't know what I just saw. And the same critique is that I think the themes and stuff were really good, just like I have with the prequels. The themes are good, the ideas are good, but the execution is just you know, when you're ambitious like that, you have to be tight on your execution. You can't just haphazardly play with these ideas and this kind of stuff and expect that you're going to be able to bring everybody along. You have to know what you're doing.
You don't think there was a room in it for the Zion Council to elect a supreme chancellor and talk about like trade route taxes and
No. I'll find a mess.
As long as Representative Banks was there to make sure that it happened.
You mean Darth Sidious Binks? Yes.
Hey, I would like to say that, so the whole thing with the philosophy and then also like Greek mythology and the religious themes and all that works a lot more for people who are into that sort of thing. Like my dad loved it because he is just all about philosophy and Greek mythology and everything. But with the mainstream moviegoer who's not so much into that, they were probably really lost on that. And it's just like, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm certainly sure that there were a fair amount of people that didn't notice that, but maybe still appreciated the storylines that were spawned or grew from those philosophies or from those mythological stories. So I'm sure they were still appreciated on lots of different levels. So guys, we are running out of time here. We're getting close to the 2-hour mark, and I know that we could probably, like I said earlier, talk about this for another 2 hours or so, but I do want to move past the point. We had originally, we were going to talk about the video games that came out from the franchise, and also the Animatrix, which was the animated series the Wachowskis had produced, where you got to see the creators of Cowboy Bebop, the creators of a lot of other, like the animated Ghost in the Shell series, and a lot of other famous Japanese anime series got to come together and basically do mini stories about the Matrix universe itself, not necessarily based around Neo and Trinity and Morpheus, but based with those characters still being represented in the stories, but primarily trying to focus on other aspects of the universe. Basically trying to go the route that Star Wars is doing right now with Clone Wars, Mandalorian, all that, which plenty of other franchises have done. So let's kind of incorporate all this into one thing. Do you guys think that the Wachowskis capitalized on the Matrix franchise as a whole post the third movie? It's been 18 years since the last one came out, and we are now getting a fourth one, which in my opinion, and you guys are welcome to agree or disagree, I don't think we need a fourth one. Honestly, I think they should have done a TV series. I thought they should have done, I was talking to Luke and Ian about it before you guys got on, Gary and Michael, about a live action TV series where maybe we had 1 or 2 of the actors from the original trilogy make an appearance or have a minor role. Maybe you have Lawrence Fishburne come in and he's explaining to new people that enter the Matrix about the choices that they can make between the pills, things like that. And then new stories are formed. I wanted to hear more stories about how the world began to survive after the fall of the robot civilization, or at least the impact that was had with Neo being involved, that the one finally arrived, and how they began to live side by side. Did humans come up to the surface at some point? Did they somehow scientifically fix this toxic atmosphere, and were they able to begin regrowing humanity as a whole again? I thought there were a lot of different directions they could have taken, and they never did that outside of the Animatrix, which was just like, I think it was like 9 episodes or something. And I thought they could have capitalized on it really well. I think with this new one coming out, Lawrence Fishburne isn't even in it. I don't know if it was contractual obligations or he's just getting too old and he didn't want to do anything. And I love
He was never asked.
Yeah, and he may not have been never asked. I do love Yahya Abdul Mateen. I mean, the guy's done a lot. He's had a lot of really good roles in like in Aquaman, and he did God, damn it, what's the one we watched where we really loved um Eddie Redmayne and Sacha Baron Cohen. It was on Netflix. The trial of
the Chicago 7.
Thank you. The trial of Chicago 7. Yeah, he was one of the prosecutors in that, and there's apparently bringing him back as Morpheus. I'm not sure in what capacity. I wasn't able to find that in one of those articles. I don't know if he's Morpheus's son or a younger version of Morpheus or the next coming of Morpheus. I have no idea. But they're bringing back Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss. They're bringing back the guy that played the Merovingian. They're bringing back Jada Pinkett Smith. They're bringing back all these people, and then they're not bringing back key elements like Lawrence Fishburne and Hugo Weaving. And I guess I just don't know what to expect from the fourth one. So I'm obviously going to go see it. I am anxious to see it because I love the original trilogy. But I'm a little pissed that they chose to go this route instead of just creating the live action series. I thought with the way that TV is today, it's a lot easier for you to go out and because there's a bigger audience than ever before for the TV series, and there's more money and more creativity than there ever has been before. And I don't know. I'm kind of pissed about it. So I don't know. I kind of want to see what y'all's thoughts were. I mean, outside of this movie, the animated 9-episode series and the video games, they haven't done anything. Do you guys think they did enough? Do you want to see them do more? What do you think? Gary, let's start with you.
I mean, I don't think that we need to necessarily see more. I think that if the Wachowskis feel like the story that they want to tell has been told, then they really shouldn't try and stretch it out and just make it like, don't just make crap for crap's sake to make money. Like, if you've got to tell something, then tell it. Like they did Speed Racer in between now and then, which that's a whole other thing to talk about. But I would much prefer it that they don't capitalize and try and squeeze every penny out of it if it's just going to just become more bland crap. And
so you didn't think that the world the Matrix built, you didn't think it justified them creating more things off of that? Like you didn't find that the world to be interesting enough?
It was a very interesting world, but if they said everything they needed to say about it, like I don't need to have 9 fucking movies of the Matrix like they did with Star Wars and just beat the shit out of this thing that I love until it's just dead in the corner, and then they just rape that.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm fine.
Again, we love Gary for his intensity. Sure, but I mean that's my point. Is I agree with you. I don't think they should have done any other movies. I don't think they should. I think they should have allowed the creative control to either themselves or given creative control out to some up and coming artists or directors that had been inspired by the Matrix from a younger age and allowed them to take a whack at it, because that's been done in a lot of other successful franchises in the past. They allow people to make their names off the piggybacking off of their idols and such. Michael, what about you? Do you think this is do we need to see a fourth one? Like, have they done enough? Do they need to do more? Should they have done it differently? What do you think?
I mean, do we need to see a fourth one? No. Do I want to see a fourth one? Abso-fucking-lutely. Like, I mean, so here's the thing. Yeah, I have a little bit of worry that we're gonna beat this to death. I have a little bit of worry that they're gonna come in and they're gonna do something so stupid, or they're gonna try to base everything just off of the special effects or just off the nostalgia value, that it's not going to be a decent story behind it. But I also think it's been 20 years for these folks to think about the world that they've created. And it's been 20 years for them to see the world change over time, as after the Matrix came out and you saw the advent of more of YouTube and Facebook and social media and and all of the connectivity that the world has had over the past 20 years. And then to take a look at that and say, okay, now that we've seen a little bit more of this in real life, how can we describe our feelings about that, or what kind of stories can we tell, having lived a different experience now within that same universe of the Matrix? And as I said, I am scared that they're going to destroy it. And if they destroy it, then hopefully this is the last one that they do. But I am excited to see a fourth Matrix movie. I'm excited to see where they can go with this. And yeah, we
Mm.
may have some questions about the casting and why aren't certain people back or anything, but there's also rumors that these cast of characters may still be present in another film, that there may be a fifth one where it's like, okay, now let's explain some stuff to you, why you're seeing younger versions of these folks, or why you're seeing different versions, or the
Mhm.
perceptions might be different. um as far as the rest of the universe of the Matrix goes, I think I am glad they didn't go necessarily the George Lucas route of let's make it, let's slap it on every fucking thing that we can and try to sell it to make a buck.
Mhm.
I'm glad we weren't necessarily saturated with it or oversaturated. Sure, there were a lot of toys and there was a lot of stuff, and there were a handful of video games, and hell, there was an MMO that was around for a good 5 years. I think '04 to '09 the Matrix Online was present. It didn't make a crap ton of money, but it was still present, continuing to tell a story, continuing to push stuff forward, and allowing the players to get involved with it and kind of move the story forward themselves. But I think there was the right amount of other media that was out there, and I do think the crowning achievement as far as that other media that was out there was the Animatrix. I think it was beautifully done, and I think it was a great concept for how to tell some additional stories behind this. Because I want to say my favorite one within the Animatrix, it was a two-parter, and I want to say it was called the Renaissance, the birth of the
Second,
Renaissance.
I
But
think
Yeah, where the machines rose up, like it
right,
explains.
the
Yep.
prequel.
yeah, and it tells that
Mhm.
whole story, and it's the idea of them creating Zero One, their own nation, and how does humanity respond to that, and how does this
Pretty
war
cool.
kickstart, and why is the sky scorched? And because in the first movie they left it like we have no idea what happened, but we know it was us that scorched the sky. So they took that time to go back and say, okay, here's how it happened, and it was
Mhm.
just. And there was also a beautiful one where can't remember the name of it, but the guy was a athlete and he had pushed himself so hard that he actually pushed himself outside of the matrix, and like his mind had pushed beyond what his body was capable of, and because his mind couldn't comprehend it, it's like his muscles tore themselves apart as he was having
Hmm.
these images of like coming out of it and into the pod and back into the matrix, out into the pod, back in. And if I remember correctly, the end of that episode is like two agents that are walking into his hospital room while his daughter or his girlfriend or whatever is leaving. So it kind of leaves it up to, well, did they kill him? Did they try to figure out what's going on? What? But I just think the Animatrix was beautifully done, and I think it was a great way for them to tell some additional stories at that time while they let
Yeah.
stuff process and let stuff kind of bubble over time.
Yeah, it was certainly a really interesting way to go about it, and I definitely need to go back myself, and I want to go ahead and watch it again before this fourth installment actually comes out, just to refresh my memory. Luke, how about you? Do you think that we're in need of some more content, not necessarily the movie, or do you think it's been played out?
I don't know. I'm one of those people who wonders if we needed a Matrix 2 and 3 after the first one.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because of the way the first one ended, it's like, where do you go from there? You've kind of beginning and ending of everything. So I mean, my standards actually aren't that high. I'm always down for, I'm always open to good stories in a universe that I like, which is why I get so annoyed by stuff like The Last Jedi that is done poorly, because you really have to do it bad to piss me off. And
Hmm.
so I think they could do it. I think it could be done. I just don't know. I mean, do we need any of it really? Do we need the first Matrix? I don't think you really need any of the art. It's just there for, entertainment. But yeah, I mean, if they do it right, it could be fun. I just don't know. After 2 and 3, I kind of was checked out of the series, of the franchise, you know what I mean? So at this point, when I heard they were making a fourth one, it was just like, yeah, that sounds about right. I'm kind of surprised it took this long.
Yeah, yeah. Ian, how about you?
So I also love the Animatrix. It was very well done. Of how it's just a bunch of short stories that have nothing, that like no real impact on the main story from the first, or well, from the trilogy. So if they do anything like you, I mean, you were talking about a series. So if they make a series like the Animatrix or like an Animatrix 2, where it's just an anthology, bunch of different stories that are loosely connected, I think that's the best way to go in about it. As far as this new one, I'm cautiously optimistic. I've been disappointed before, so
That's what she said.
Oh.
Oh, Gary, you're so clever.
uh, yeah. However, like, yeah. So it might suck. It might be good. It's too early to tell. However, I do find it interesting how that there is one thing that they're going about that they're exploring in this new one that we haven't seen before, which is the blue pill, and I'm
Yeah.
really interested in that. So, I mean, as far as we know, it's just Neo has no memory of the first three films, and he's like going crazy pretty much, and
Yeah.
he's taking prescription blue pills. So I would like to see how he got into that situation,
Well,
and then what happens with that.
it,
And
it could very well be maybe that he had gone through so much pain and anguish through those first three movies that he asked them to put him back into the Matrix, kind of like Joe Pantoliano's character, and
yeah,
erase his memory. I mean,
yeah,
probably not
very
possible.
possible.
That's the
Yeah.
thing
Also,
is I don't
died
I
at
don't
the
actually
end,
think he's
so
in the
now
Matrix.
him and Trinity died,
Yeah.
and now they're back. So
Yeah.
so
Hers, I'm a little more confused about than him. I'm a little more confused about
yeah,
her. That one, when I saw her name on the IMDb cast list, I was like, "What?"
right. And then take the name of this movie. This is The Matrix Resurrections. So
Right.
uh
Mm-hmm.
so
Praising for
I
the dead.
that's probably a hint that there's some resurrection going on. Also, like like Christ, like they're saying Neo is Jesus pretty much, and so there's the whole resurrection thing. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it has potential to be really good, but it also has potential to be really bad. It's just too early to tell. But yeah, I would also like to see if they do a series. I don't want to see any more of the main thing or like a solid story, just an anthology of just short stories. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. So, guys, unfortunately, we have run out of time for this evening, and I know we always save our last couple of minutes for recommendations for the week that our listeners love to hear from you guys, just so they can kind of broaden their horizons on what they're watching. To hopefully find some diamonds in the rough that they'd never heard of before or seen. So let's go ahead and we'll jump into it. Gary, I'm gonna let you start us off this week. What movie or series or anything like that would you recommend for our audience to take a look at? Preferably something sci-fi action or sci-fi related, if you can.
I'm going to recommend. I think it was. Who was? I think Luke was talking about Metropolis earlier. They had a 1923 movie of it, but I'm going to recommend the anime of it that came out in, I want to say, like 2010 ish. It's called Metropolis. It's an anime. It's the only one that they have. Which is a very interesting story about a detective who's trying to find the daughter of this really rich mogul who runs this giant robotics company that all these robots are slaves, and they find out certain facts about this company and what's going on in the world, and then there's sort of a slave revolt at the end. I mean, the story is like 100 years old, but I still won't spoil it. So it's got a very cool ending, I think. So my recommendation will be Metropolis for all of you AI people out there. Boop, boop, boop.
Jesus, Gary, it's late out in Austin, everybody, because you can tell Gary's delirious. So, oh, Jesus, I don't listen to him anymore. Michael, let's go to you next. What would you recommend to our listeners this week?
Sure. So it kind of follows. It's the same theme with science fiction, messianic figure, this idea of hope and trying to overcome a great evil.
10 Commandments. Oh, no.
No, 10 Commandments.
No.
1997, The Fifth Element.
Yeah,
I know you laugh, right? But now
No,
think
it's
about
good, it's
Lilu and
Why are you laughing?
Why are you laughing,
Oh,
Gary?
it's good. It's good.
Why are you laughing?
Go on.
But no, I really like The Fifth Element. I think it's entered that cult classic realm. I don't think a crap ton of people really liked the movie when it first came out, but slowly over time, people have learned to kind of appreciate the story and the world building and the ideas behind it. And I think it's just a fantastic movie.
It's a great movie. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why you're storing stones inside your body, inside of your luggage, but it's fine. It's,
and a great opera scene right there.
Okay, Gary. All right. If you want to hear the vocal stylings of Gary Elmore, check out the link below for his version of One Day More, where he mixed a full 9-person and choral track to one man's voice.
Can you do links on podcasts?
Link in the description.
You're in the Matrix.
You're in the motherfucking Matrix.
Luke, how about you? What's your recommendation for us this week?
I'm gonna go with kind of sticking with the theme, and one of the ones that I mentioned earlier. I'm gonna go with Brazil, Jonathan Pryce, Terry Gilliam, 1985. Another one of those sci-fi dystopian movies that the first time I watched it, I would just you kind of like it's same thing with a little bit kind of like with the Matrix. Where you're like, what the fuck is this? And then as you watch it again a couple of times, the absurdist, the Kafkaesqueness of it kind of sticks out to you more and more, and you just kind of, especially as you get older, you appreciate how close to reality absurdists can be sometimes.
Oh yeah,
perfect. Ian, how about you?
I also am going to go back to one that I mentioned earlier, Existence. I recommend this to like everybody I can. Spelled EXISTENZ, Existence. It's just like The Matrix. Came out the same year as The Matrix, 1999. It's virtual reality gaming in dystopic future, and basically it gets, without spoiling too much, it's a little too real, and some of the characters aren't really sure if when they exit the game, if they actually did exit the game, and if they're not still in the game, because they go in a game, and then in the game they play a game, and then in that game they play a game, so in a game and a game and a game, and
Gameception.
it's very esoteric.
Yeah,
and it's great. It's very low budget too, so I mean, there's not a whole lot of really good special effects, but the idea behind it is very, very well done and very unique for the whole simulation deal. So definitely check that out by David Cronenberg.
excellent. I know you, and I know your crew loves Cronenberg for sure. Mine for this week is going to go ahead and be Independence Day Resurgence. It's certain.
Boo!
Why would you do that, Johnny?
That's not even a joke.
What the hell?
It's just hurtful.
There's a movie with 35% right there. Well earned.
No, that's like 20%. That's 20, baby. No, I just wanted to see everyone's reaction.
Causality.
I was literally speechless.
I'm actually gonna go pretty mainstream on this, only because it's a movie you actually really do need to go back and watch multiple times to you miss a lot of things the first time you see it because you're not expecting it. I'm going to go with Inception. I'm a big Chris Nolan fan, not his latest work over the last few years, but for the most part, I usually am. It's a movie where you see these people are traveling, they're dream walkers, essentially is what they're referred to as, and they travel through people's dreams, convincing them of ideas that they want for something in reality to happen a certain way. So they plant the idea in the person's subconscious, and then sometimes they go inside of that subconscious into another subconscious and into another level of subconscious. It's very confusing, but it's a very interesting concept. And at the end of the movie, you don't realize if what you watched was immediately a dream or if it really happened, or if what's currently happening inside of that dream is a dream and you don't know whose dream it is. It's really a lot of fun if you got about 2.5 hours to waste or kill. But I've always really liked it, and I know I don't normally go super mainstream, but I would do want to with that one. because it's very relevant to the current topic. So, guys, thank you so much again for joining us. I really do love these franchise episodes that we get to talk about. I know it's a lot of information to pack into 2.5 hours, but love having you guys on. Always love the heated debates and the thoughtful insight that you guys all bring. So thanks a lot for joining us. Hope we can do it again soon. And as for all of us that I don't give a flick, I'm Jonny.
I'm Gary.
And Neil Riley had to leave early, but he'll be back with us next week. And we hope you'll join us next week. We'll see you guys then. Thank you for tuning in to Lead Feather Productions' podcast of I Don't Give a Flick. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast so that you never miss an episode. Podcasts are available on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and everywhere podcasts are hosted. I Don't Give a Flick is hosted and produced by Johnny Blackburn, Gary Elmore, and Neil Riley. Executive producer, Johnny Blackburn. Technical director, editor, and audio mixer, Gary Elmore. I Don't Give a Flick is a Lead Feather production. Copyright Lead Feather Productions 2021.